Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Samuel Ritchie, and I serve as the Radio Spectrum Advisor to the Commission. On behalf of the Commissioners and the Commission's staff, I'd like to welcome everybody in the room to this workshop, especially those who've had to travel from other areas of Ireland and those who come further afield to be here. You're very welcome. In order to extend the reach of this workshop, we're running a live webinar, and I'd like to extend a welcome to everyone that might be participating on this basis. And we'll be placing a recording of this webinar on the ComReg website for interested parties and as a record of today's proceedings. Last but not least, I'd like to welcome the Commissioner's Economic and Auction Design consultants from .econ, and I'll introduce them individually a little later. The purpose of this workshop is to provide an overview of the entire award process, to walk you through the auction stages of the award process from the perspective of a bidder, and having a look at how to use the auction software, enter and check decisions, to explore the implications of the main stage auction rules for bidding decisions, activity rules, supplementary bids, consequences of the rules are for winner and price determination, and then explain how the assignment options for specific frequencies will be created. As this workshop is intended to provide an overview only, it's important that all interested parties should fully familiarize themselves with the provisions of the information memorandum. If you're going to participate, you need to know it in detail. And of course, any further information we may provide in the answers to questions which we're going to publish as part of this process. On the 11th of July this year, having given careful and due consideration to all the relevant material received, including the many views received from interested parties, and I recognize some of you who've written to us in this regard. So since that consultation process began in September 2014, we've had a look at all the materials and we've published our substantive decision on that 11th of July. And on the 24th of August, we published the information memorandum which details the process and procedures that we're going to employ to implement those substantive decisions. The publication of that information memorandum also kick-started this award process. So the process that we've been through has generated several thousand pages of analysis and submissions and letters and information, and all of that has been published, and all the reasoning and justification has been published, and they're a matter of public record. So the workshop today is not intended to discuss that process or the whys associated with our decisions. We're here today to discuss the implementation of those decisions, the mechanics, the how we're going to do it. And I feel I should take this opportunity to make two quite brief remarks. Firstly, to say thank you. We carefully consider every submission that's made to us by interested parties, be you an operator, a manufacturer, a corporate user, an individual consumer, or a citizen. We're not arrogant enough to believe we have the monopoly on knowledge, and we've learned from the submissions we've received. And if you go through the documentation, you'll see there are numerous instances where our our initial proposals have been adapted based on what we've received. Two examples are the adoption of regions, including their subsequent adjustments, and the reduction of reserve prices, including a change in the split between upfront and spectrum usage fees. Secondly, a number of people in different fora, here in Ireland, in Europe and wider, have expressed the view that spectrum auctions are becoming more and more complex. In the last 16 years, I've been involved in many spectrum awards, from the simple first come, first served, through to single seal bids, to multi-band CCAs. So let me say a few words of complexity from my viewpoint. We certainly could have come up with something less mechanical or computationally complex. We could have simply repeated something that we've done before. We could have repeated something that maybe the German administration does. But this would only have been possible if we were prepared to compromise on one or more of our statutory objectives, or our duties for this award, or potentially make the award process less attractive to some of those who may wish to participate. Yes, there is complexity, but acknowledging that, we've endeavored to place all that computational complexity on our side of the table. And you'll see this reflected in the software that will be used in the auction. It provides user-friendly interfaces for making and checking bids and managing the deadlines for the various rounds, allowing you to enter supplementary bids on the fly to check things out. And when Dotticon speak on that, you'll see a few screenshots of that. Furthermore, it's important to note that the complexity of bidding decisions and the risks faced by bidders in alternative formats may be significantly higher, even if the auction mechanics superficially appear simpler. A superficially simple auction can create excessive complexity for bidders if it depends on bidders forming expectations about the behavior of other bidders, instead of focusing what's the spectrum worth to you, and you start worrying about what other bidders might be doing. For example, it could result in a bidder being stranded on unwanted lots or receiving inaccurate information about the nature of demand in an award. It's also important for bidders that the activity rules that we put in place and the pricing mechanism provide incentives for all bidders to bid in line with their valuations, rather than any attempt to conceal their true valuations. And Dotticon will again speak on this more in detail. Finally, a further factor in our complexity, the complexity that's being created, is our wish to give flexibility to all bidders to switch demand between the 9 regions and or the 2 lot types, and or where they want to, how many lots they want in regions, So this results in 18 lot categories and 594 lots. Once again, when you see the auction software, you'll realize all that complexity has been taken off you. So perhaps a simpler approach, or a different approach would have been simpler, but it could have been costly, potentially costly in terms of giving flexibility to bidders and ensuring an efficient outcome. If, for example, the rules of the auction prevented you from changing your target lots during the course of the auction. So having said that, let me talk about the agenda. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to give you an overview of the award process, just to set the scene for what's going to follow and to remind you of what you've read in the information memorandum. I'll then ask Dotticon to walk you through the auction stages of the award process from the perspective of a bidder. They'll explore the implications of the main stage auction rules on how bidders should make decisions, focusing especially on auction rules, supplementary bids, and the consequences of the rules for winner determination and pricing. No later than 11:30, I will call for a coffee and comfort break. And having had a run through yesterday, probably at 12:30, I'll call for a further comfort break. There's going to be a lot of opportunities to ask questions after every stage of the workshop, and let me be very clear here. As flagged in the information notice last week, we're only going to deal with questions raised today that relate to points of clarification on the presentation material, on the mechanics of the auction. Questions that are raised that are not points of clarification on the presentation material, or for which a better, more complete response could be given in writing to give you certainty and clarity. If those can be better provided in writing, then that's how we'll do it, and I will decide on that as the questions come up. And we are currently in a question and answer stage of the award, and we could add these answers to that process. And that's described in section 2 of the information notice that we issued last week. There are people watching online. They also have the opportunity to ask questions, and they need to type them. And they'll be read out from the main table, and we'll respond to those. There's a further caveat. If it appears appropriate that we answer a question here that we're quite happy with, we may want to include that in written form in the questions and answers session if we feel that that would add value to people who are not here, or even people who are here who want certainty on what was said. So we do reserve the right to repeat the question and give those answers in written form. And even to amend our answers to give clarity as things develop. And in a previous award, there was a constant stream of questions. Questions were answered, we published draft answers. They created more questions, we published draft answers. And when the deadline then finally came, we published the final answers to everything. So we do reserve the right in that process to amend answers as we go along. Right, let me give you an overview of the award process. So in this award, we're making available 350 megahertz of unpaired spectrum in the 3.6 gig band. And there are two types of lots. An A lot, that's a single frequency-specific 25 megahertz wide lot from 3410 to 3435. And then we have 65 5 megahertz wide lots that we are calling type B lots. And they are going to be awarded in the first stage of the auction as a frequency generic lots. And let me just quickly explain that. Magic. If at the end of the main stage of the award, you have won a type A lot, that's essentially the end of that. You know exactly where you are in the band. You may have also bid for and won, for instance, 100 megahertz of spectrum somewhere in here. And at the main stage of the award, you will know how much spectrum you've won. And in the assignment stage, it will be fixed where you are, where that one contiguous block of 100 megs of spectrum will be. Those are the two types of lots. Then we've divided the country to 9 discrete regions, which can be bid for individually or as part of a package of region. In all of these regions, there are no overlaps. And in each region, all 66 of the lots are available. It is open for you as bidders to decide what you want to do in the future with your license. Do you only want to cover some rural urban areas? Do you want to cover larger areas? How much spectrum do you want in each of the area? You need to decide when coming to the auction what you want to do. And the auction rules and process allow you to express your interest in any of those packages in the process, in the award process. At the end of all of this, each successful bidder will be issued with a liberalized use license, which allows you to provide services and contains conditions such as, but not limited, how to coexist with other users, your rollout obligations, quality of service obligations. And Annex 2 of the Information Memorandum has the draft regulations which details all the conditions and obligations that will apply over the 15 years of the license term. The spectrum fees applicable to this award consist of an upfront fee and an ongoing spectrum usage fee. For each lot or for each package of lots, the upfront fee is the market price as established by the competition. The lowest this fee can be is the reserve price for that lot or the package of lots. And here you can see the reserve price for each of the regions, for A lots and B lots. But that's not the end of the fees. The ongoing spectrum usage fee is the amount you need to pay, first of, prior to the award of spectrum in the 1st of August 2017, and then again prior to the 1st of August every year thereafter until the final spectrum usage fee is made, payment is made in August 2031. So that's 15 payments in total. Yes, 15 payments in total over the lifetime of the license. And that amount is set for the first year, but will be adjusted according to the CSO Consumer Price Index every year. So for the avoidance of doubt, it can go up and it can go down. And we're living in a history where we have actually reduced license prices because it's gone down in the past. And here you can see the SUF that will be applied in 2017 for each lot type in each region. The award process has 6 distinct phases, and today I'm going to cover the milestones of the first 2 stages, and Dottie Con will go into detail on the auction stages, the main stage and the assignment stage. Today, we're currently in the application stage, and this started, as I've said, when we published the information memorandum on the 24th of August. Today, we're completing the second milestone. We're holding this presentation workshop. The period for questions and answers is running, and you can submit questions until the 28th of September. And if you look at previous history, if you turn to ComReg document 1273, which we published in July 2012, you'll see the type and the breadth of questions that were asked in the 2012 award spectrum. So don't be shy. Questions are all anonymized before publication of the questions and answers to conceal the identity of interested parties. Just please make sure you follow the rules detailed in section 3.3.1 of the information memorandum as to how you get those to us, how you anonymize the container that those questions arrive in, and who you send them to, or how you deliver them in this case. It is our intention to publish questions and draft answers on a weekly basis so that people can see what's been asked and maybe ask follow-up questions or questions that then come to mind. And we'll do that until the 12th of October, we'll do that by the 28th of September. That's the last hour you can submit questions. And by the 12th of October, we will publish a consolidated document of questions and final answers. In the previous process, we also published clarifications that arose during the process. To take part in the award, your application forms need to be received by 4 p.m. on the 26th of October, and that procedure is detailed in section 3.3.6. Again, to keep the identity of interested parties anonymous. And where interested parties want to bid jointly as a consortium, this can occur prior to the application date for the submission of applications. It's required that if you're an applicant, you need to submit a monetary deposit, and it must be at least the sum of the reserve prices of lots requested by the applicant in your initial bid form. And we must have the deposits as cleared funds before 1 minute to midnight on the 26th of October. From the time you submit an application up to the point where we make a public announcement of the outcome of the award, all applicants are bound by the rules concerning confidential information and bidder association. Don't underestimate the time and effort required to put together the ownership structure document that's required as part of your application. Even some of the smallest companies have such linkages into shelf companies, shareholders, and so on. And we scrutinize that document and we check it in very fine detail to make sure there's no connections or associations between different bidders. And it has been the case before where those have been found simply because somewhere way down the list has got an association unknown with another bidder that's needed to be cleared up. If you feel you want to submit large diagrams that can cover a whole wall describing the linkages, do just that, but just give us 4 copies. This is the one area that caused a lot of toing and froing in previous awards, either because applicants hadn't explained something, thinking it wasn't important, had left out sufficient details so that we couldn't trace the information. And I think the biggest issue was What was submitted didn't match the records available at the company registration office because those records hadn't been updated. And that's okay. We needed a bit of to and froing just to get that paperwork on board to prove that things had indeed changed. Another area that caused delays was the submission of copies of board resolutions or delegation of authorities. We need to see originals. After all of that admin work, we're going to move to the qualification stage, which is more admin. Having submitted an application form, you can withdraw without penalty of any sort up to 4 p.m. on the 16th of November. Why? Because you may have formed a consortium that's taken a while to sort out, and then you want to withdraw one of your applications. We also allow applications to be replaced with a new application for exactly the same kind of reason. You may have formed a consortium or shareholders come in, your company's suddenly been bought from under you. So we make provisions for withdrawing applications as well as submitting new applications, but everything is locked down on the 16th of November. We will then scrutinize the applications, making sure everything is legit, making sure there is evidence given for every claim and every association. And no later than the 7th of December, we will inform each applicant as to whether or not they have become a bidder. Some of the reasons applicants may not become a bidder include: you've submitted a bid that breaches the competition cap, you failed to make a sufficient deposit on time, the application is incomplete, inaccurate, invalid, or simply untrue, or we cannot prove something that you've claimed and you've been unable to provide evidence, or application clarifications I've just said are simply not provided in sufficient time. At the conclusion of this stage, when we tell you if you become a bidder or not, we'll also say whether there's going to be a main stage. Because if demand does not exceed supply for every single lot category, then there's no need for a main stage. However, if there is excess demand for any one lot category, then we're going to have a main stage. And we will announce on the same day the scheduled start date for mock auctions to take you through that process of training to actually do an auction. If there is no main stage, we'll tell all the bidders and they will be the winning bidders for their package, their initial package. And we will we'll let each one of you know who's won what and advise of the scheduled start date for mock auctions that will only cover the assignment stage. If we get to the point where there's no need for either a main stage or an assignment stage, we'll notify all the winning bidders of their winning bids and move to the notification and grant stage. If we are going to run mock auctions in any form, and we do expect that is the case, we'll distribute the necessary materials in the week beginning 12th of December. And that normally comes to you in the form of a DVD with certificates, passwords, a one-time code sheet in case you're having to phone us so we can identify who you are. We'll also return deposits to any applicants who fail to become bidders by the 14th of December. Once the auction's completed and we've notified bidders of the results and made that public announcement, we'll move to grant licenses as appropriate, and Section 3.7 of the Information Memorandum details that process. The transition phase is detailed in Section 3.8. In essence, when the assignment stage is completed and we know the specific frequency assignments for each winning bidder, we then require all affected parties to submit a transition plan proposal. ComReg will examine all of those, and consulting with winning bidders and existing licensees as appropriate, we'll formulate an overall transition plan for the whole band. That plan will identify all transition activities to be undertaken by existing licensees, the order each activity needs to be taken, and the milestone dates for each activity. And as before, that will all be published and made publicly available. Further information on applicable dates. When's the auction going to start? When will the assignment round? All that is, those deadlines are only provided to parties that are actually involved in those stages. So no one will know. If you're not a qualified bidder, you won't know when the auction is going to start. So in relation to what's been presented so far, I'm ready to take questions, first from the floor, and then anything that's come in from online. Now, put your hand up, please, and wait for the roving microphones to get to you before you speak, because we have people online and we want to record it. And it's at your discretion if you wish to identify yourself and or who you represent. Are there any questions from the floor at this stage? Bear in mind, there's a lot more opportunities. Right, think about that. Is there anything online? We have a question from the floor. So,
Mr. Chairman and dear colleagues, my name is Karim Ben Abdallah. I'm from 3 Ireland. So my question is in relation to the license duration as part of the process. Today it's 15 years. If, for example, we win some spectrum and the EU move the license duration to 25 years, like we have heard in the media, what will be the impact on the award? Will the price of the spectrum usage fee continue over 25 years? Will it stay to 15 years? Will it be some recalculations? That's my question.
Yes.
Thank you.
So you're asking me to speculate on a license regime that's not in place in a framework that's just still being spoken about, and I can't do that, Karim. I cannot commit ComReg to anything which is speculative. We have to see what comes out of the European Union, how that's transposed into Irish law, how ComReg is obligated to deal with it, and deal with it then. Sorry, I couldn't be any more precise. Somebody else? At the front, please, Melody.
You stated there that moving through the process, if the demand does not equal the supply, then the main stage will not be progressed with, and the spectrum will be allocated to the bidders. If that happens, at what price? Is the reserve price the minimum price?
Correct. Absolutely correct. Yes. You win whatever you've put in your initial bid at the reserve price. We go to the assignment stage to determine where in the band you are located. Okay.
Hi. If demand is only exceeded in one region, all lots go forward to the main stage, or just that region?
All lots in the main stage, because there's the option that, having perhaps been outbid in that area, you want to transfer your demand somewhere else, maybe limit the amount of spectrum you want or increase it elsewhere. So we need to run the whole main stage to capture all of those possibilities. Anything for online yet?
No.
Okay, I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to invite John Coates, who is the managing consultant at Doticon, to speak. And next to him is Dr. Dan Muldoon, who is a partner at Doticon. And these are the good people we're using to help advise us on many of these matters.
Hey, thank you, Samuel, and good morning to everybody here and also everybody participating via the webinar. So in this first section of the Doticon presentations, we're just going to have a summary run through of the auction process and the mechanics of that and how it works. And then later on, Dan will go into more detail on some of the more intricate aspects of the rules. Okay, so first just recapping on the lot categories available in the auction process. Samuel's already gone through that, but just to remind ourselves, there are 9 regions, and in each region there are 2 types of lot available. So there's a single A lot for 25 megahertz of spectrum in the part of the band below the frequencies currently sort of used by state services. And there's also 65 B lots for 5 megahertz each in the area of the band above state services. Now, as you can see, for each and every lot, there is a number of eligibility points assigned to that lot, and also a corresponding reserve price. And the eligibility of points that you'll see will be relevant for the activity rules that we'll explain a bit later on. So overall, we've got 18 lot categories available in the auction. That's 2 for every region. And one important aspect that we've not mentioned before is the competition cap, which means that no bidder may be awarded more than 150 megahertz of spectrum in any region. Okay. So just looking at the aspects of the award process now that are important from a bidding point of view, so the stages where bidders will actually submit bids in the process. And the first stage is the application stage, in which bidders will need to submit an initial bid. And what that is a specification of a number of lots in each lot category that the bidder would want to purchase at the reserve prices. And that's important, well, firstly, for determining whether there's a main stage required, as Samuel explained, and it's also important for it determines the amount of the deposit that you'll need to pay, and it's applicable for the activity rules, which you'll see later on. So, as Samuel said, if there is excess demand in the initial bids during the application stage, then we'll need to run a main stage of the auction, and that establishes the number of lots won by bidders in each category. And as we've seen, the A lots have specific frequencies already assigned to them. The B lots are being allocated initially as frequency generic. So in the main stage, all we do is establish the number of B lots that will be awarded to each winning bidder in each region. We also determine a price, the base price that each winning bidder will need to pay for the lots that it wins in the main stage. Now, because the B lots are frequency generic in the main stage, we need then to establish how the winners of the B lots will be positioned within the band sort of above state services. So then we run into the assignment stage, which does that. One important thing to note about the assignment stage is that bidders are able at this point to, in a sense, coordinate and bid in the assignment stage as what we call an alliance. And we'll explain more about that later on. Then following, at the end of the assignment stage, there will be a negotiation period that will allow bidders to negotiate amongst themselves to establish any sort of reorganization of the frequencies based on what they are assigned at the end of the assignment round. And all of that we'll get into or look through in a bit more detail later on, so hopefully it will become a bit clearer. So having a look first at the main stage of the auction. So what's the structure of that? So there are multiple rounds in the main stage. There are multiple primary bid rounds to start with, and then a single supplementary bids round. In each primary bid round, bidders will bid for a single package of lots at prices that are set by the auctioneer. In the supplementary bids round, bidders are given the opportunity to submit bids for multiple packages of lots, and they get to choose the bid amount for each package, but that's subject to a number of constraints. And all bidding in the main stage will take place through an electronic auction system. So you'll be able to log into the EAS, the electronic auction system, and use that to submit your bids. And Dan will explain a bit more about that later on. Okay, so I've mentioned in the previous slide this concept of package bidding. So what do we mean by that? So a package bid is basically a selection of lots in every single lot category available, which could be 0, it could be a positive number, and a corresponding bid amount. So that's a bid amount that is for all of the lots selected in the package. And it's a very important point to note with that is that packages will never ever be broken up. So you'll never bid for a package and then win only part of that package. You would only win a subset of a package you've bid for if you explicitly submit a separate bid for that subset of lots. And you can make bids for many packages over the course of the auction, and that might mean changing the package that you bid for during the primary bid rounds as prices change. It might mean submitting a number of supplementary bids for different packages in the supplementary bids round. But you would only ever win one of these packages. So that the upshot of these rules on package bidding is that you would win at most one of the packages, which means you either win one of the packages in its entirety or you would win nothing. So just looking a bit more about how the primary bid rounds work. So at the start of the round, the auctioneer would announce prices, a price per lot for every lot category. And will also announce the schedule for the round. So that's the start and finish time within which bidders will need to submit their primary bid. And as I say, that's a single bid for a package of lots at the round prices set by the auctioneer. Now, the expectation is that the primary bid rounds will run for a length of time between 30 minutes and 2 hours. And there will be a minimum of 30 minutes between rounds, which should be sufficient time for bidders to analyse the results of the round and prepare for the following round. Another important aspect of the scheduling is that in the primary bid rounds, we allow bidders 2 extension rights each. What that means is if a bidder does not submit a bid before the scheduled end of the round, provided it has extension rights remaining, the round will automatically extend for up to 30 minutes for that bidder. And the bidder will be able to submit its bid within that extension period. As I say, bidders start with 2 extension periods at the start of the primary bid rounds. However, once an extension right is used, you will lose one. So if 2 extension rights are used, and then in a third round, the bidder fails to submit a bid before the scheduled end of the round, then it will not be possible for the bidders to submit a bid in that round. And the EAS will behave as if the bidder submitted a zero bid. So that's a bid for 0 lots at a price of 0. Okay. And at the end of each primary bid round, bidders will be informed of the level of total demand for each lot category. But there won't be any information about the specific bids submitted by other bidders. Okay, so how does the pricing work in the primary bid rounds? So, as I say, the round prices for each lot category are set by the auctioneer at the beginning of the round, and they will be in units of 100 euros. For the first round in the main stage, the price per lot for a lot category will be equal to the reserve price plus a single price increment if there was excess demand for that lot category in the initial bids. If there was no excess demand for that lot category, the price in the first primary bid round will simply be the reserve price for the category. In subsequent rounds, we would increase the price for any lot category where there was excess demand based on the bids submitted in the previous round. If there was no excess demand, then the price would remain the same as in the previous round. Now, just to manage expectations on what the price increases will be, they will not be greater than 20% of the previous round price. Okay. And then the primary bid rounds will end, and the main stage will proceed to the supplementary bids round when there's no excess demand for any lot category in a round. Okay. So now just having a quick look at the activity rules that will apply in the primary bid rounds and the constraints on bidders' ability to submit supplementary bids. So every bidder, or a bidder will begin every primary bid round with a number of eligibility points. So that's its current eligibility. And we define the eligibility of a package as the sum of the eligibility points associated with each of the lots specified in that package. Now, a bidder can bid in a round for any package with eligibility that does not exceed the bidder's current eligibility, so the bidder's eligibility at the start of the round. There are no constraints on a bidder's ability to bid on those packages. And if a bidder bids on a package with eligibility that is less than its current eligibility, then the bidder's eligibility to bid for the next round will be reduced, and that will be reduced to the eligibility of the package that the bidder bid for. So that will restrict the number of packages in the following round that the bidder can bid for without constraint. Now, the rules do allow some additional flexibility for bidding on packages with eligibility that exceeds the bidder's current eligibility. And making that such a bid, that's termed a relaxed primary bid. But there are constraints on when a bidder will be able to submit a relaxed primary bid. And in particular, that requires consistency with the bidding behaviour in previous eligibility-reducing primary bid rounds. So an eligibility-reducing primary bid round is a primary bid round where the bidder bid for a package with eligibility less than its current eligibility. And those constraints, well, Dan will go into a lot more detail later on, but they're based on the idea of revealed preference and require that the bid choice made in the current primary bid round is consistent with value differences implied across packages in previous eligibility reducing rounds. As I say, Dan will go into that in more detail and the implications of that a bit later. One thing to note at this point in terms of relaxed primary bids is that it might require, or the ability to submit a relaxed primary bid may require a bidder to increase its bid amounts for previous packages that it bid for. So these are known as chain bids, and they are there to ensure that the consistency required is there across the bids and not just across the round prices. Okay. Now, one more point to note in terms of the eligibility or the activity rules in the primary bid rounds is that if a bidder submits a zero bid, so that's a bid for 0 lots at a price of 0, then its eligibility to bid in the next round will fall to 0, and it will no longer be able to participate in the primary bid rounds. And that includes relaxed primary bids. It will no longer be able to submit any relaxed primary bids or standard primary bids. Okay, so moving on to the supplementary bid round and how that works. Well, this is a single round in which bidders can submit multiple package bids. So that's a number of bids for potentially many packages, and they are all submitted simultaneously. So it's not the case that you submit one and then another and then another. The bidder would build up over the course of the main stage a list of supplementary bids and submit that list as one. So in terms of scheduling the supplementary bids round, there will be a minimum of 3 working days between the end of the primary bid rounds and the start of the supplementary bids round. And the round itself will be run on a single working day between the hours of 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. The duration of the round will be determined by ComReg closer to the time. Now, as I say, during the main stage of the auction, bidders will be able to maintain a list of supplementary bids. So that means adding packages and bids to the list of supplementary bids, removing packages that it's added and perhaps no longer wishes to bid for, or modifying the bid amounts for those supplementary bids. Now, it's important to note that all of the primary bids submitted during the primary bid rounds will be binding, and it's not possible to either delete the bids for those packages or to enter lower bid amounts than the highest primary bid submitted on that package. And the bid amounts themselves for the supplementary bids will be are discretionary. They're specified by the bidder, but there are a number of constraints that apply to the supplementary bid amounts. So we'll have a look at those now. So this is just constraints on supplementary bids in general. So bidders will be able to submit a maximum number of supplementary bids for 1,000 distinct packages, and that includes the package included in the initial bid and packages bid for during the primary bid rounds. Bid amounts must be in units of €100. The bid must be no lower than the reserve price of the package and no lower than the highest primary bid submitted for the package if it were a package bid for during the primary bid rounds. There are also caps that will apply to the supplementary bid amounts. So there's a final price cap which will apply to every package other than the package bid for in the final primary bid round. And there are relative caps which apply to every package with eligibility that exceeds the bidder's eligibility at the beginning of the final primary bid round. And those caps are also based on the idea of relative or revealed preference and require consistency between the bid amounts and the choices made during the primary bid rounds. And again, Dan will go into this in more detail later. So if it's not clear now, hopefully that'll be clarified a bit later. Okay. So during the main stage, each bidder will likely have submitted a number of package bids. And these are all taken into account to establish the winners and the prices at the end of the main stage. So that means the initial bids, the primary bids and supplementary bids are all binding and all go into the algorithm used to establish the winning bidders. And the set of winning bidders, the set of winning bids, is the one that gives the maximum value of the accepted bids. So that's the value based on the bid amount. And that's subject to each bidder winning at most one of the package bids it submitted and not allocating more lots than are available in any given lot category. And then the base prices that will need to be paid by winning bidders for the package of lots they win, and that's calculated based on an opportunity cost pricing rule, which ultimately means that winning bidders will pay the minimum amount they could have bid on and still won. So that is an amount that is no greater than the bid amount they submitted, but potentially less than that amount. And at the end of the main stage, bidders will be informed of the lots won by all bidders and also their individual base price. But base prices of other bidders won't be revealed at this stage. Okay. One more point to note about the main stage is just about the possibility of deposit calls that may arise. So during the primary bid rounds, if a bidder's deposit or current deposit falls to an amount that's less than 50% of its highest bid submitted so far, that bidder may be required to increase the deposit to at least 50% and not more than 100% of its highest bid. Following the supplementary bids round, before we announce the main stage results, a bidder may be required to increase its deposit to an amount up to 100% of the highest bid it has submitted so far. And ComReg will allow at least 3 working days between providing notification of the requirement for a deposit top-up and that having to have been made. Okay. So we're going to move on to the assignment stage shortly, but I think possibly at this point it's worth pausing for any questions that we might have on the main stage so far. Okay. Anything online? Okay. Yeah.
David Humphreys, Meteor Air. Are eligibility points transferable within and between regions during the main stage?
In the sense that, yes, so if yes, so you can switch. Yes, you can switch your bids across regions. So if you're using, say, 50 eligibility points to bid on lots in one particular region, you can stop bidding on that region and then increase your demand for lots in another region up to those 50 eligibility points.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, can I have that mic on? There's one online question which concerns whether it's possible to submit a relaxed bid or a supplementary bid which has eligibility in excess of the eligibility of your initial bid. So remember, the initial bid is the bid you make with your application of which you submit a deposit. And the answer to the question is that yes, it would be possible if the circumstances allow that, depending on how relative prices have changed, to make a relaxed bid or a supplementary bid potentially with eligibility in excess of your initial bid. There is no restriction on the eligibility of any bid that you make implied by the initial bid.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions before John carries on? I mean, there will be a longer Q&A session at the end of this presentation, but just on the main stage, are there any more burning questions?
Okay, let's carry on then. Okay, so now we're looking at the assignment stage. Now, as we've discussed before, the main stage determines only the number of lots won by each winning bidder in each lot category. At this point, the B lots have been assigned on a frequency generic basis. So the winners of B lots will know the number of B lots they've won, and that will tell them sort of the bandwidth that they've won, but they won't know exactly where in the band their frequencies will be positioned. So that's why we have the assignment stage, which determines which frequencies are assigned to the winners of the B lots. Remember, of course, that the A lots have a specific frequency assignment, so the assignment stage isn't relevant for those. Now, an important point for how frequencies are assigned is that winners will always receive a single frequency range, so that's a contiguous frequency block in each region corresponding to the number of B lots they have won. And for the specific frequencies assigned, the winner will have to pay an additional price. And that's a price on top of its base price, which could be zero or it could be a positive amount. Okay, so we mentioned before that winning bidders will be allowed to participate together in the assignment stage. There will be a period of 10 working days following the end of the main stage in which bidders can form what we call alliances. So this is a group of bidders who have won B lots in the main stage and are agreeing to participate in the assignment stage as one, and the assignment stage will proceed as if the alliance members were a single entity that were awarded the total number of B lots assigned to each member, sort of in the main stage. Now, in terms of the formation of alliances, in that period of 10 days allowed, each alliance must notify ComReg that it's formed an alliance, and that will involve telling ComReg the identity of each winning bidder included in the alliance, and also the identity of a nominated leading member, which will be responsible for things such as entering the bids on behalf of the alliance, paying any additional price, and making any deposit top-ups. So there are a couple of restrictions as well on the formation of alliances, and those are that a winning bidder may be part of at most one alliance, and also an alliance will not be allowed if the total spectrum to be awarded to that alliance would exceed the competition cap of 100 megahertz in any region. Okay, so part of the assignment stage is what we call the assignment round, in which bidders are able to express their preferences over possible frequency assignments. So for the assignment round, we introduce this concept of assignment bidders, and it's just worth explaining at this point what we mean by that. An assignment bidder is a single entity that's participating in the assignment round. That could be either an alliance or an individual winning bidder that's not formed part of an alliance and is participating by itself in the assignment stage. Now, at the start of once any alliances have been established, we would determine the ways in which each assignment bidder can fit into the band. That will give a number of feasible band plans or frequency plans. And then if there are multiple frequency plans, which means that at least one assignment bidder could be positioned in more than one place within the band, then we'd need some mechanism for establishing which of those frequency plans we choose. And that's the assignment round. Now, we'll come on to the assignment options later, but essentially an assignment option for a bidder is a specific set of frequencies in each region in which the bidder was awarded B lots. And they correspond to the different assignments that the bidder could be given according to the frequency plans determined, or the feasible frequency plans that have been determined. Now, the assignment round is a single bidding round. It will start at least 2 clear working days after bidders have been notified of the assignment options, so the possible frequency assignments that could be given to them. And again, the auctioneer will announce the start and finish times for the assignment round. It'll run on a single working day between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. and is expected to last for at least 2 hours. Okay. So once the assignment options have been established, bidders will be told of what they are. In terms of how the assignment options are established, they're based on the number of B lots won by the assignment bidders. So each assignment bidder will be, its assignment options will correspond to the number of B lots won in every region. Frequency assignments for each assignment bidder will be contiguous in every region. If an assignment bidder is awarded the same number of B lots in each and every region, so that's in all 9 regions, then it will be guaranteed to be awarded the same frequencies in every region. For other assignment bidders, we try to establish the frequency assignments so that the frequencies are aligned as much as possible across regions. And that may require using some of the unsold lots, if there are any, to pad, to provide a bit of padding and align and provide better alignment across the regions. Otherwise, the unsold lots will form a contiguous block of spectrum where possible. And Dan's going to go into a lot more detail later in terms of exactly how these assignment options are generated. Okay. So in the assignment round, a bidder will be able to express its preferences over the various assignment options that are available to it in the form of assignment bids. So that but will win only one of the options that it could feasibly be given. So the assignment bids, the bid amounts are discretionary and in units of €1, and the minimum bid amount for an assignment option is 0. There's also no obligation whatsoever to submit assignment bids. You can submit an assignment bid of 0 for all of your options, or you could simply leave the field blank, in which case an assignment bid of 0 would be assumed. So the important point to note there is that not bidding or submitting 0 bids for every option in the assignment round will not affect the amount of spectrum you win. It only affects potentially where the spectrum you've won in is positioned within the band. Okay, so following the assignment round, there may be another deposit call in which an assignment bidder may be required to increase its deposit up to an amount that covers its base price plus the highest assignment bid it submitted. And for an alliance, it's the base price and the current deposit of the leading member that will apply in the calculation of the deposit top-up requirement. And the leading member is responsible for paying or making any deposit top-up, although in the case that the leading member doesn't make that top-up, the other alliance members will be liable for that payment. And similarly to the main stage, ComReg will allow at least 3 working days for a deposit top-up to be made after providing notification of that. So following the assignment round and any deposit top-ups, we will determine which assignment bids are winning, so which assignment options are allocated to each assignment bidder, and any additional prices that might have to be paid by an assignment bidder for the specific frequencies they're given. Now, it's important here to note that the frequency assignments and additional prices apply to assignment bidders, not necessarily individual winning bidders. So in the case of an alliance, the alliance will at this stage be allocated a specific frequency range in each region where the alliance members won B lots, and the additional price will apply to that alliance as a whole. Alliance members will need to decide amongst themselves how the frequencies they're assigned are split amongst the members, subject to each alliance member being given contiguous frequencies, and also how the additional prices would be split. And note that payment of the additional price is the responsibility of the leading member of the alliance. After establishing the winning assignment bids and additional prices, the outcome of the assignment round will be notified to winning bidders. You'll be told the identity of the winning assignment bidders, the specific frequency ranges assigned to each assignment bidder, and the additional prices applying to the winning assignment bids. And the outcome of the assignment round then establishes what we call the provisional frequency plan. So sort of a default final frequency, set of frequencies that will be assigned to the winning bidders. But that leads on then to the negotiation phase, which is a period of 10 working days in which assignment bidders may negotiate a reorganization of the frequencies that they've been assigned according to the provisional frequency plan. And those are subject to the constraints that all winning bidders must receive, or all assignment bidders must receive the same amount of contiguous spectrum within each region as before the reorganization, and all other assignment bidders must be unaffected by any given sort of reorganization of the frequencies. And it's important to note as well that any reorganization is subject to the approval of ComReg. Also that the additional prices established in the assignment round will still apply, so assignment bidders will still be liable for the additional prices they pay, irrelevant of whether or not their frequencies are moved during the negotiation phase. And the second aspect of the negotiation phase is that leading members of any alliance should inform ComReg of the specific frequency assignments to be awarded to each alliance member. And that's taking into account the specific frequencies assigned according to the provisional frequency plan and any reorganization sort of in which that alliance was involved. So at the end of the auction, so following the negotiation phase, the final frequency plan will be established based on the provisional frequency plan and any reorganization of frequency assignments that's been accepted by ComReg. Bidders will be informed with the release of final results of the identity of winning bidders, the frequency ranges awarded to each winning bidder, so this is winning bidders rather than assignment bidders at this stage, the base price to be paid by each winning bidder, and the additional price that each assignment bidder will be required to pay. The award process will then proceed to the negotiation and grant stage. So, any questions on the assignment stage or on the main stage if anything's come to mind?
Hi, I'm Tom Hickey from 3. I have a question and it relates to the alliance negotiations. So after the main stage, every winning bidder will be informed who the other winning bidders are and they will know the quantity of each lot that the other winning bidders have bought or have won. They will then be free to go and try and work out an alliance that might work for them in the assignment round. So they will have to have quite a free-ranging conversation with the other winning bidders.
That's correct.
And that might involve expressing views on preferences for the assignments. And some of those discussions might be successful, some might not. So there will be quite an exchange of information. So the first question is, I would like to know, are there any restrictions on the content of those discussions that have to be held at that time? Second question is, if during those discussions it becomes very obvious that there is an assignment outcome that would be suitable for all winning bidders and all winning bidders would be happy with, is it possible, or is there a way that the winning bidders can bring that forward and skip the assignment round rather than be forced to go through a bidding mechanism and risk a different outcome?
Right. Well, I think, in terms of the first question, I don't recall off the top of my head what the confidentiality arrangements are in...
So we do accept that within the rules, you are going to have that wide-ranging discussion with everyone or a subset of people who've signed up to the rules of the competition. And within that, there is scope to do those discussions. But it's releasing that information to people who are not involved in the process where the rules are really kicking in. On the second question, we will be running the assignment stage, because what you can all do is submit 0 bids and then in the negotiation phase do an arrangement. But we will not be short-circuiting the process. We will be running the assignment stage. An online question?
Yes, so this is a clarification which I think John has already answered. So just to cover this clearly. In terms of what bidders know at the end of the main stage, you will know the identities of the other winners and how many lots they have won, because obviously it wouldn't make sense to go into this alliance formation stage. You will not know the base prices that are being paid by other winners, though obviously you will be told your own base price, just to clarify that. And then we have another question about whether the final frequency plan will be made public at the end of the auction, to which the answer is yes.
So in terms of the, just wait for the microphone, please, Melody.
In terms of the alliance top-up, you said there that the lead bidder would be required to increase their deposit, possibly up to the maximum bid. But if other members of the alliance aren't aware of what the base bids were, what the lead bidder actually secured in terms of the price they paid, if one or more of the members is either unable or unwilling to increase their bid, or increase their deposit, there's only a 3-day window permitted. Can that be extended if one or more of them fails to meet that obligation?
Well, the window is at least 3 days, so ComReg has discretion to have a longer window if there were particular circumstances. I mean, you can see the rationale of this, which is that we don't want to have to get involved into the internal mechanics of alliances. So if an alliance is formed, the lead member is meant to take responsibility essentially for making the bids on behalf of the members of the alliance. And then, I mean, were there to be a deposit call coming out of, suppose somebody had very, very strong preferences for particular frequencies and put in very, rather large assignment bids that then triggered the need for a deposit call, then that obviously goes first to the lead member, who then has to essentially sort out what the allocation of those deposit requirements might be to other members. But the members would not know each other's base price at that point. but the additional deposit would be presumably, under those circumstances, related primarily to the scale of the assignment bid that is being made. I think that is not a particularly likely scenario, but clearly the auction rules have to cover all eventualities, including the possibility of there being sizable assignment bids that may lack credibility if not backed by a deposit. So I think the general approach of the deposit rules is to there always to be an option to require a deposit to ensure credibility, just so that other bidders know that there isn't the potential for facing rivals who might be making essentially unsustainable bids.
But the primary question really is, ComReg have the option to extend that 3-day window?
Yes, that's correct.
And sorry, just on the deposit top-ups, is there defined rules as to how much that is? You know, is there what that call will be, when that call will be made?
Yes is the answer. They're exactly the rules which John described.
Yeah, but he said they may be required. At what point the ComReg decide, well, you need to make that deposit?
Right. The limits of discretion are laid out in these rules within the IM in terms of the amounts that can be asked for and potential trigger conditions. That is, there's no obligation on ComReg to call for a deposit. So what's set out is when ComReg may call for a deposit, what the most the deposit could be, and what the minimum amount of time to make payment would be. So essentially the worst case for a bidder is laid out.
Okay.
Anything else online, Dan?
No.
Sorry, man, one question. In terms of the assignment round, what role does the A lot play, if any, in terms of determining the assignment option? So if a winning bidder had an A lot and some B lots, would it try and stack them all at the bottom end? Or
None whatsoever is the answer. And the reason is, of course, because state services sits in between the A lot and the B lot, so that they're separated. So the assignment stage is only dealing with B lots. And whether or not you've got an A lot has no implication for the assignment options that you will be presented. Could I just, if there are any more questions from online bidders, could I just suggest that they type them in fairly readily? Okay.
Anything else on the floor? Okay, it is 11:25. We're going to break for tea, coffee outside in comfort for 20 minutes. We'll see you back at 11:45, please.
To our online attendees, we will be restarting in a couple of minutes.
Okay, if we could settle down, please. Ladies, gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could settle down, please. Thank you, Dan.
Okay, thank you, Samuel. What I'm now going to do is talk a little bit about the implications of the rules that John discussed with you before the coffee break. And I'm going to break this into two sections. The first is looking at the main stage, and then we maybe have a little short break and then look at the assignment stage. So I think probably out of all the material, the next set of material about the implications of the main stage rules is probably the most challenging. So what I may do is just pause at certain points. But if you have a sort of pressing question on the material as being presented to you at that moment, just raise your hand. And there'll obviously be a Q&A section at the end, but it may, in some cases, it might be more appropriate just to resolve any lack of clarity at the relevant point, just to make things easier for everybody. Okay, now, I'm going to start with a disclaimer. I'm going to talk about possible bid strategies here to a certain degree, which is a slightly unusual thing to do in terms of the usual presentation of auction rules by a regulator, but we want everybody to understand what the implications are of the rules and to start to think about how they might approach the auction. And we think it would be most useful to do that in an open way where we discuss a little bit how somebody might actually respond to these rules. Now, obviously, this is not a recommendation to bid in any particular way, and you should go away and do your own analysis and thinking about bid strategies. So this is not in any way a recommendation. It comes with no guarantee on the tin, etc., etc. I will also try and show you a little bit of the working of the auction software, and I'm going to show you some screenshots from a beta system which we currently have on the stocks, and obviously that might be subject to some change between now and the actual auction. So again, please treat what is in the slides as being provisional. Right. So I want to start by just thinking a bit about the general philosophy of the CCA auction and what we're trying to do with it. Okay. And at a very high level, essentially what the CCA is about allowing multiple bids for alternative outcomes. So as a bidder, I can bid for a number of possible things, okay, and the auction mechanism can determine which of those I then win. So when I say multiple bids, I mean we've got multiple bids in the sense of there are multiple primary rounds where I might bid for different packages, and then the set of packages on which I have bid can then be filled out in the supplementary bid stage. So when the auction goes through into the process of determining winners, essentially each bidder will have a number of alternative bids there, of which at most one of those will be winning. So the result of that is that there is a possibility of bidding in a flexible manner where you express your relative willingness to take a number of alternative packages of spectrum. So for this auction, for example, it might be that you're after a certain target amount of spectrum, and providing it's not too expensive, you want that much. However, if it gets expensive, maybe you want a smaller amount. Okay, you can compromise with a smaller amount. So essentially there you have two alternatives, and which you want to come to pass is obviously dependent on the price of those alternatives. And what the CCA essentially does is allow you to put those alternatives in and then see which one then wins. Now obviously for this to work, your bids have to in some way sensibly represent what your relative preferences are between those alternatives. I mean, if you put in bids which don't represent that relative preference, there is no way for the black box of winner determination in the auction to pick the one which you would prefer. Okay? And that's really the theme of what I'm going to talk about this morning, which is how the auction activity rules create a situation where you can bid for alternatives and essentially use the auction mechanism to then allow whichever one you prefer to then win. Now, John talked a little bit about package bidding, and this is an important aspect of these auction proposals, these auction rules. And the reason that we have package bidding in this auction is that it gets rid of the possibility of winning some, but not all of the lots that you might want. And the reason that the auction is structured in this way is really to do with the problem of synergies that might occur across different lots. So to take a very simple example, let's suppose you had somebody who said one lot's worth 10 to me, but if I get two lots, that's worth not 20, but 30. So there are some synergies to having two lots. Now, the problem is, I mean, if you think about auctions where you were bidding separately and independently for those two lots, let's just suppose that I made a bid, say, at 12 per lot, at a price of 12 per lot for two lots. Well, that's good. I'm paying 24 in total for two lots, and it's worth 30 to me, so that's good. I'd like to win. Well, what happens if I win one of those bids, but not the other bid? I will have paid 12 for something that's only worth 10 to me because I won't have got the synergy. So if the reason package bidding is in there is to remove risks that bidders would otherwise face where they have synergies across lots. Now, in this auction, obviously synergies can arise very naturally because you may want multiple B lots to deploy services at a certain bandwidth. You may need rather a lot of B lots. If you think about B lots being assembled together to make, say, 20 megahertz carriers, then there are clearly strong synergies. There's not much I can do with a single 5 megahertz lot. There may also be synergies across regions to do with marketing, to do with deployment, to do with scale economies in purchasing equipment and so on. So this is why we have a package bidding auction, and every bid that you make in this auction is for a package of lots. So if I bid for a package and I win a subset of that lots, the only reason that can happen is because I explicitly bid for the subset as an outcome that I was prepared to take. Now, one of the more complicated aspects of this auction is clearly the pricing rules. If you've worked your way through the IM, you'll see there's a lot of equations at the very last pages of the IM, which set out formally how all of the pricing rules work. Now, although it all looks a bit intimidating, there's actually a very simple principle involved with this, which is that what we're trying to do is to create relatively clean incentives for bidders to behave in a straightforward manner, where you don't need to be worrying about what everybody else bids. So Samuel mentioned this point earlier in the context of complexity. So we have somewhat complicated arrangements for pricing, which obviously that's our problem in the sense that we have to write the software that correctly calculates the answers. Okay, but it makes life easier for bidders in the sense that it permits relatively straightforward bidding strategies. And I'll just give you a very simple analogy. If we were running, say, a sealed bid auction in here for, I don't know, a bottle of water or something, and I asked you to all put sealed bids in an envelope, and then whoever has the highest bid wins, then obviously you have to think about not only what is the object worth to you, but also how much competition do I face? Can I shade it down a bit? Can I get away with bidding this amount or a lower amount? Well, there's a chance of losing then. How do I trade off the chances of losing with the lower price I'll pay? So you have all those kind of considerations. It's complicated because it requires expectations about how everybody else is going to bid to be formed. Now, what we're trying to do with the pricing rule here is actually to strip away all of that and essentially say, well, what you pay is not necessarily what you bid in this auction. It's essentially what you need to have bid to have won. Okay, so it's as if the auction mechanism itself goes away and saves you some money up to the point that you still have a winning bid. And I'll formalize those statements. I'm making them informally at the moment, but I will make some precise kind of mathematically provable statements which explain exactly what I mean by those ideas. But just keeping it simple for a minute, there are some very, very easy rules we can follow here. Firstly, this approach never involves paying more than you bid. You'll be glad to know. You will always have to pay reserve price for anything you win, but it's actually, the rules are a little bit stronger than that. Actually, each and every lot has to essentially yield its reserve price for it to be allocated, otherwise the lot would be unallocated. So if a lot withdrawing it means that the auction revenue would drop by less than the reserve price, then that lot will not be allocated. It will just be put on the shelf for future award. The prices are determined by this opportunity cost pricing rule, and the critical feature of that is that that depends on what other bidders are prepared to pay for the lots you win. So the price that I pay is, in the first instance, determined by the bids of other bidders, not actually by my bid. Now, there are some slight nuances in that statement, okay, but to a good approximation, that is a reasonable statement. So what that means is that what you pay is essentially determined by the extent of competition from other bidders. So going back to my envelope example and the sealed bid, we don't have to second guess how much competition there is from other people to decide what bid to put in. Okay, the price that you pay in this auction is a reflection of competition from other bidders. Now, this approach to determining the winners and what people pay has what you might call a sort of no regrets property in the following sense, that losers should be happy in the sense that the winners of lots in the auction will have paid a price such that there are no bidders here who could propose some alternative outcome, by which I mean who gets which lots and how much they pay, that would be preferable to those bidders given the valuations they've essentially expressed through their bids. Okay, so if we assume that everybody's bids is a reasonable statement of what they actually want, that means the people who've lost should be happy to have lost, okay, because there's no outcome that they can propose, okay, which would be preferable to them and which would generate the same or more revenue, okay. So losers are happy. But also winners are happy here as well, because collectively the winners in this auction pay the least amount possible, subject to still winning what they win. And if they had paid any less than that amount, so the total amount that the winners pay, if they had paid any less, then there would have been unhappy losers. Okay, so if I took down the prices paid by winning bidders just a little bit more, okay, below the base pricing rule here, there would be unhappy losers. So this is what's called a minimum revenue core pricing rule, if you want to be technical about it. But the minimum revenue bit means that the actual amount being paid is as low as it can be, subject to the competition that has been created by losing bidders. Now, a consequence of using this approach is that straightforward bidding at value is typically an attractive strategy in this context, by which I mean sort of ending the auction with a set of bids for alternative outcomes for different packages which reflect the value that you place on those packages. And the reason for this is that if you bid less than your value for something, then you might think, oh, well, won't that mean that if I win it, then I'll pay less? Well, the answer is typically not within this auction, because what you pay isn't determined by your bids, it's actually determined by everybody else's bids. So if I bid less for something than it's worth to me, I run a risk of not winning it, but I typically won't have a benefit in terms of paying less. Now, I say typically because there's small aspects of the pricing rules where you can marginally affect what you pay yourself through your bid. So there's a caveat here, but these are circumstances which typically do not occur in the context of this form of auction and have not occurred in any spectrum auction as far as I'm aware to date that has used these pricing rules. So it's a theoretical caveat, but in practical terms, you can't expect with any certainty to pay less as a result of bidding less. Now, the other aspect in which straightforward bidding is typically attractive is that if you did, let's suppose that you try to engineer this and you think, right, well, I'm just going to bid above my value, because I've heard that in this sort of auction, typically you don't pay your bid. Okay, you pay something less than it, okay, as a result of the way that the pricing rules work. So what, can't I then exploit this in some way by, say, bidding above my value and then just hoping that the pricing rule will knock that down and I'll pay somewhat less? Well, the answer is no, not really, because if you bid above your value, okay, and then that has an effect in the sense that you win something that you otherwise wouldn't have won had you bid at your value, then you'll find that given what you pay for that outcome, there will be another outcome which might well have been not winning anything at all that would be preferable to you, okay, against valuations for different alternatives. So overbidding, all it does is essentially risk winning something at a price that you wouldn't be prepared to pay for it. Now, it is true that this auction, there are some possibilities of, as it were, monkeying around and gaming within it, like any complex auction. And one possibility here is that you can try to drive up the prices that other bidders would pay. Because remember, I explained to you that the pricing rule is one which what I pay depends on how my rivals bid. So what's to stop my rivals from just jacking their bids up to make me pay more? Okay, and that is a theoretical possibility within this form of auction. But the difficulty is that if anybody does that, so if you jack your bid up to try and drive up a rival's price, that only really will work if the bid that you're increasing is one which is pretty close to becoming a winning bid. So there will be some point where if you keep increasing that bid that's trying to drive up prices, it will itself become a winning bid and you'll end up winning something that you don't actually want. So essentially in any reasonable, realistic scenario, there are always going to be significant risks to using those kind of strategies. Okay. So, you know, this is the sense in which this auction is one in which actually playing a relatively straightforward hand is quite attractive. You have to have really very specific information about your rivals, about what they might do to be able to really do any better than that. And you can't expect to have that sort of information with any degree of certainty in most realistic situations. So that's very much about the philosophy of why we're doing what we're doing. So now I want to look a little bit, firstly I want to start with primary bids and how might we think about making primary bids, what are the considerations. But I'm going to park relaxed bids for a minute because they're a little bit complicated. I just want to deal with the straightforward stuff first. Then I'm going to talk a bit about supplementary bids and what principles there might be for making those. And I'll come back to this question about relaxed bidding at the end. So what do the primary rounds do? Why are they there? The idea is to try and reveal information about aggregate demand for the different lot categories and potentially the relative clearing prices that we might get for different lot categories. So you can see, for example, if one region is very highly contested and another one is weakly contested, you will see that as the auction carries on. Okay, so it gives information to bidders about how other people see the relative value of different lots. And obviously that's something which is kind of good in the sense that you can check your own business case assumptions and valuations against what you see other people doing. Okay, so the auction is there explicitly to allow information sharing at an aggregate level. Obviously there are quite strict auction rules there in terms of forbidding any kind of information sharing on an individual bidder basis, both in terms of who is participating, what their plans might be, what their bids might be, and so on. And I'd also might say competition law also applies in these situations as well as the auction rules themselves. So there, you know, what we have here is essentially aggregate information coming out of the open rounds of the auction to see, you know, how much appetite there is for different regions and for different lot categories. At the same time as we have an auction where actually everything is anonymized, you're not seeing individually what other people are doing. Okay. You can respond to these prices as they emerge by changing target lots. So you might see that a certain target that you want to go for is becoming very expensive, and actually better value might be to seek an alternative. That is possible. Now, it might be that other people might switch in response to that situation, and then what was the cheap alternative becomes relatively expensive, and everybody goes back to the original. Okay, that's possible as well. But those kind of dynamics are possible. There's flexibility within this auction to pursue different targets on the basis of relative value. To a limited extent, you can use that information to even update your own business case and valuations. Okay, but you'll see there's certain limits on what you can do. So in particular, once you start contracting down the number of lots that you're bidding on and bidding for packages with smaller eligibility, you may then start to be facing a few constraints on your bids later, which if you'd made revisions to relative valuations in your business case and so on for different outcomes, you may struggle to then implement those. And I'll explain that a little bit later. But to a limited extent, there is ability to tweak business case valuations as you go along in light of all this information. Then finally, what these primary rounds do is they essentially give us a sort of provisional outcome in the sense of finding a package which which different bidders would be prepared to take at certain prevailing round prices, which all fit together. So we have an outcome, essentially a provisional outcome of auction, which sort of works in the sense of there being no excess demand. Now that's obviously quite useful when it comes to supplementary bids round, because that gives you an idea of what might be a reasonable outcome for that auction. Now, it doesn't mean it is the outcome, because there could be all kinds of other issues in terms of, say, the allocation of some unallocated lots at this point, or maybe there's still a bit of lots being played back and forth potentially between different bidders. But you have an idea of what the sort of lay of the land is with regard to potential eventual auction outcomes, which allows you to refine your focus somewhat on any supplementary bids that you want to make as kind of backup bid options. Now, the primary round activity rules, why do we need these? Well, these are intended to stop bidders from hiding in the grass and avoid, declaring their hand within the auction until the last minute. So what we don't want is people just sort of freewheeling and then all of a sudden jumping out and then bidding on what they actually want because they think the auction's close to closing, because that completely undermines the idea of the open rounds being progressive, information revealing. They're providing some information about relative demand for different categories, potential possible auction outcomes. You get information about that. We want that information. That's useful. That promotes efficient allocation of the spectrum. Okay, we don't want that undermined by everybody waiting to the last minute to declare their hands. At the same time, we want flexibility to switch between different packages. As I explained before, relative prices could change. People could flip-flop between different potential alternative targets depending on where they see the value is here. Okay, and we want to have that flexibility. So what we want is flexibility, but at the same time requiring that decisions which are made in the course of the auction are consistent with some underlying valuations for different packages. So imagine you have a bidder who has business case valuations for different possible alternatives, and they bid to that sheet essentially. Okay, then that's what I would call consistent bidding, and that will be something which is always possible under the activity rules which are here. Now, if you're suddenly changing your objectives dramatically one way and another way, then you're going to run into potential roadblocks, or you get snookered by the activity rules. And the activity rules are designed specifically to provide the former flexibility, but the latter inflexibility. That's why they are as they are. So let me just take an aside for a moment, because this is an important idea. It may be one which people are not entirely familiar with, and I don't want any misunderstanding about it. But I want to just explain a little bit about what I mean by consistent bidding to valuation. And I want to explain a little bit about revealed preference, which John mentioned earlier. So let's just take another noddy example. Two packages A and B. Let's suppose package A has valuation 20 but price 10. Package B has valuation 40 but price 25. So, what would I do at those prices? Well, I plump for package B, because that has the larger surplus, so it's 15. So it's the value less the price to me of buying it. Now, if we increase the price of package B to 35, but kept the price of package A the same, then obviously I'd say, well, package A would be better, because I get surplus of 10 from package A. And increasing the price of package B has reduced its surplus to only 5. So I would, against those valuations, I would then, at those prices, bid for package A. And then if we think about making prices higher still, and we push the price of package A above, say, 20, which is its value, price of package B above 40, then I'd happily take nothing. That would, to me, would be preferable to winning at such high prices. Okay, so that's bidding against a set of valuations. Now, what's revealed preference? Well, let's just suppose for a moment we had somebody, we see their choices that they make, but we don't know what their business case valuations are. So we see them making choices between package A and package B, but we don't know those numbers regarding their valuations. So let's suppose that we saw package A costing 10, package B costing 25, and the bidder chooses package A. Well, we can make an inference from that, because they didn't choose B. Okay, so the very fact that they didn't choose B must limit the value to them of package B relative to package A. Because if package B was massively more attractive than package A, then they would have been prepared to pay this price premium of 15 for package B. So we know that whatever package B is worth to them, it can't be more than 15 in excess of the value of package A. So there's actually, their choices imply something about the structure of the valuations that they have for these options. In particular, the relative value for B versus A is essentially capped by the price difference due to the fact that they didn't choose B. So if at some later point we saw, say, package A costing 20, but now package B cost 40, okay, well, at that point, we've got a price difference of 20 between the two packages, and we know that the valuation difference is no more than 15. Okay, so the package B is expensive, and we know the extra expense exceeds whatever additional value it could provide for that bidder, given the choices they've made previously. So at that point, if somebody then plumped for package B when it had got relatively more expensive than previously, we'd know they were making an inconsistent choice. It's quite simple, really. You see them choose A, then B gets relatively more expensive against A. Well, you should see them choose A again. You certainly shouldn't see them choosing B. Now, if on the other hand we had some change in prices, say now that price differential narrowed, so let's suppose package A cost 20, package B cost 30. The price differential is narrowed. Now, they might choose B, they might choose A, but that's fine. It's certainly fine for them to choose A at that point, because A has got relatively cheaper against B. So it's possible that they might realistically choose A at that point. So you can see that as the prices change of these different packages, sometimes we can rule out particular choices which would be inconsistent with choices that we've observed previously. And that's essentially the principle that the auction activity rules work on. Right, now, let's just switch now to eligibility points, because you're probably aware that this is a common feature of many, many auctions to have eligibility points associated with the lots to essentially provide a notion of when you sort of contract down and bid on smaller things, smaller packages of stuff, you can't suddenly then decide you want the whole world again in some subsequent round, that there's an idea of your options narrowing. Now, the way the eligibility points work in this auction, they essentially define a safe harbour in the sense that you can always bid for any package that doesn't exceed your current eligibility. So if I start the auction with an eligibility which is determined by the initial bid I make with my application, if I wanted to, I can just keep plugging away on packages at that eligibility level, and I can always switch around on packages at that eligibility level however I want. Okay. If you don't drop eligibility, you're not creating any constraints at all on subsequent bids that you make, and that includes supplementary bids, relaxed primary bids, anything. There are no constraints. You're not creating any kind of future hostages if you maintain your eligibility level. So rounds in which your eligibility stays the same have no implications for your future behaviour, what you can and can't do. If you drop eligibility, okay, so you bid for a smaller package than you were bidding on in the previous round according to this eligibility count, we say this is a special round, okay, that you have made a significant choice here, okay, and this is a round where we are going to impose subsequently consistency with the choices that you have expressed in this round, okay. And in a very high level way, you can see, I explained to you a minute ago this reveal preference idea and the idea of consistency of choice. And the whole auction, you could summarize, all of the activity rules, you could kind of summarize by saying, where you drop eligibility, that you will be held to be consistent with the choice that you made in that round where you dropped eligibility. If you don't drop eligibility, there are no consequences. So when we do this, what happens is, firstly, your eligibility level obviously falls for subsequent rounds, and also we create what are called relative caps, okay, and I'll explain those in a minute, which apply to both relaxed bids and supplementary bids, okay, which will restrict the amount that you can bid for packages which are larger than you have chosen in this round. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. So let's take a very, very simple example. Let's suppose I had eligibility of 100 and I bid in some round R for a smaller package X. And let's suppose that had eligibility 80. So I've stepped down my eligibility by bidding on a smaller package. I've chosen to bid for X, which has got this lower eligibility level. Well, obviously my eligibility will now drop to 80 for subsequent rounds. But also there will be consequences when subsequently I come to bid for a package with a eligibility of more than 80, either as a supplementary bid or as a relaxed primary bid. So let's suppose I bid for a package, let's call it Y, just to make it easier to refer to these different packages. And let's suppose that was above the 80 eligibility level, but was no more than the 100 where I started. Okay? Then my bid for this package Y will have a cap on it relative to the package X that I chose in this round. Okay? Those will be tied together. So if for some reason I increase my bid for X, then that will obviously increase this cap. It's a relative cap, okay? But what I can bid for the larger package Y will always be subject to this ceiling relative to X, right? And the reason for that is that I drop down in this round at certain prices to a smaller package, okay? So I can't subsequently then say, well, I'll just have a bigger package again, please, at some, massively higher bid level, okay? Because I should have done that in this round if that was what I genuinely wanted. Okay? So the fact that you have dropped down, we will hold you then to limit your bids on bigger packages when you subsequently get the opportunity to make those, all right? And a relative cap, just to get the terminology of the rules right, a relative cap is this constraint that basically you can't exceed the price differential that applied in this round when you reused eligibility. Okay, and that's a critical concept in the activity rules. It's worth understanding that. Now, there are a number of, there are essentially kind of two systems of constraints here. Because there are also sets of constraints which arise out of the whatever you are bidding for when the primary rounds end. Okay? So the primary bid rounds stop when there's no excess demand in any category, as John explained earlier. And the primary, whatever you're bidding on, this primary package, final primary package, will determine constraints that you can bid on, They will set constraints on what you can bid for anything else other than the final primary package when you come to the supplementary bids round. Okay, so this is what we call the final price cap. And the assumption behind all of this is really the following, which is we will assume that you were bidding for what you preferred when the auction, when the final primary round's finished. Okay? So remember what I said before, you know, when eligibility falls, we'll hold you to your decision at that point. Okay? But also when the primary rounds finish, we will hold you to that decision at that point. Okay, so if you go off on a bit of a wild goose chase bidding for things that you don't want, okay, first thing is you shouldn't reduce eligibility because otherwise you'll get held to it. And secondly, if you find that the primary rounds stop while you're off on your wild goose chase, you would be held to the preferences that you have expressed. Okay, so the idea with this is obviously that, you know, there's some wiggle room in these rules to do different things, but essentially as the auction progresses and the primary rounds get closer to finishing, you are always facing this constraint that when the music stops, you know, you will be held to being in whichever chair you are at that point, in the sense of the decision you made at that point will imply consistency requirement across other bids that you then subsequently enter. So this is the final price cap, and this says that the supplementary bid for package X can't exceed what you bid for the final primary package that you had at the end of the primary rounds, plus the price differential between that package and the primary package that applied in the final primary round. Okay, so many words, but hopefully the concept is relatively straightforward. So I now want to switch for a minute and talk a little bit about how it looks from the perspective of the auction software. It might be appropriate just to pause very briefly for any clarifying points. I'd rather not open up new issues, but there's anything that's sort of unclear in what I've said. I'll sort of deal with that now. Okay. There will be plenty of Q&A at the end where I'm happy to deal with broader points, but if there's anything specific. Right, so let's just have a look what this would look like on the electronic auction system. So just by way of introduction, the electronic auction system will be used for entering, checking and submitting bids. And with all of the bid decisions that go in, it's basically a two-step process, which is you put in your decision, okay, the auction system will throw you back some confirmation which says, yes, that's all correct by the rules, good, here's a summary of what you're requesting. And then at that point, you will make a confirmation, at which point that decision becomes locked in. So it's always a two-step process. The electronic auction system will manage the round deadlines. So John talked a bit about things like extensions and so on. That's all dealt with automatically by the auction system. It will give you a countdown, tell you what the deadlines in force are and so on. And it will also provide messaging through from the auctioneer. So the auctioneer can issue you with messages through that system and can verify that you've received and read them. This is all based on standard web browser. It doesn't require any special software. Obviously, it's internet-based, so bidders would be sensible to ensure that they had some kind of backup in case of network problems, though those are increasingly rare, I think, these days. In terms of authentication and security, there are a number of separate security mechanisms. So it will use digital certificates as well as various password authentications, and they are distributed. They would be distributed to qualified bidders in December, according to the timetable that's set out in the IM. So Here is the current test system. So let's see if this works. So here we go. We're just about to log into the system. As ever, there's a bit of a... the lawyers have been busy on the bottom section. So, as I say, it's always a two-step process. Enter a decision, check for compatibility, done by the EAS. There's an acknowledgement, and then you confirm. So if we go and have a look at an entering step, so let's have a look here. I'll go through the different aspects of this. So here we've got round 2. So this is a primary bid round. Round 2 is in progress. This is what you have to do. Enter your bid for round 2. Here we have a start time. So I think these screenshots were done about a week or so ago. This is a 3-minute round, which is obviously not compliant with the rules in the IM, but I think this was just done for testing to get the thing rolling quickly. And you have an end time here, which tells you when it will finish. Now, this is only a part of the screen, and what you're not seeing, there's a control bar over here, which we haven't included because it's small enough as it is, but that will give you a countdown clock and various other functionality. So what we have here is the form for entering a primary bid. So we have here all the different lot categories, A1, B1, A2, and so on, the relevant frequency range, the region name, the lot size, the eligibility points available for the eligible points associated with that lot, the number of them there are available, so that's either 1 for an A lot or 65 for the B lots. Here are the round prices for this round, which have been posted by the auctioneer. You heard earlier about how those are increased according to how much excess demand there is. And here you get to enter your decision using drop-down boxes to select the amounts. Here, this tells you how much eligibility your bid will have, and there's a total which is down here, which you're not seeing on the screen, and how much you're spending, and there's a total for that. So if I came to change my decision, it's simply just a matter of just putting in the relevant quantity. So you'll see there's nothing to do with prices here because they're set by the auctioneer. You don't get to decide the price. You simply just have to say how many you want at those prevailing prices. Okay. Right, so I'm now going to just move on to the supplementary bids round. So what's the supplementary bids round about? Well, we can't assume that the outcome at the end of the final primary bid round is necessarily an efficient outcome. I'm not going to go into why that statement is true in any detail, but I mean, you can kind of see scenarios where you could end up with quite a large number of unallocated lots at the end of the primary bid round, for example. I mean, I mentioned the fact that people would have minimum spectrum requirements, maybe if they want a certain number of carriers to supply service with a certain bandwidth and so on. So if it gets too expensive, they might not drop out by just sort of nickel and diming and reducing the number of lots they're doing for smoothly all the way down to 0. They may go, that's enough, I'm out. Okay, so they may drop from quite a large number of lots to 0. Of course, at that point, other bidders will be limited in what they can bid for because of they've already reduced their packages down. They can't suddenly now take up those unallocated lots at that point. And obviously, it would be inefficient for the auction to finish in that way because people could have expressed demand to take up the unallocated lots at that point, but they've just done it in previous rounds. They're just not doing it in the final round. So we wouldn't want to just say, well, the outcome is whatever happens in the final primary round, because that could be grossly inefficient and could involve ComReg hanging on to large amounts of spectrum when other people had expressed potentially large willingness to pay for it. Somebody could have been bidding for that stuff in the round before the final round at almost the final round price. They might have been prepared to take it. So the supplementary bids round is there to deal with those kind of problems. So what we're interested in is kind of looking at other alternatives for bidders that they might be prepared to take and basically try to put all of those potential alternatives that bidders might want into the pot and then try from that to extract an efficient outcome, which is what the winner determination process does. But the problem is that bidders may not have bid for other packages of interest to them during the primary bid rounds. Okay, so you may have had a target in a different region, say, but you just may not ever have bid for it because the way that the prices evolved during the primary bid rounds, I always had a different target that I always wanted, and that was always what I preferred. I just bid on that. There might have been a sort of second alternative that might have been, close to as good, but I just never bid for it because the prices never pushed me away from my primary target. However, it could be that there's a bit of reorganization of lots needed because of, say, unsold lots in the end of the primary bid round, and I might end up losing my primary target as a result of the reorganization that might be required to reallocate those lots in some way. Now, of course, if I'd never then expressed that backup option for me, that I'd been prepared to take something else instead, I could just end up losing entirely. So what the supplementary bid round does is it allows you to then enter other packages that you may not have bid for at all during the primary rounds, other alternative targets, and enter bids for those. I mean, these may all be secondary consideration, and they may have bid values that are significantly below your primary targets. The point is that you can put all these backups and alternatives in there. I mean, you could also use this approach to go for a sort of value-based bidding where you might have a number of possible alternatives, and whether I get a certain amount of spectrum or more, it's all price dependent. Well, that can essentially be entered into the auction system through supplementary bids that have bid differentials between the bid amounts that I bid that reflect the relative values for those alternatives. The winner determination method will then sift through all that stuff and will pull out an efficient outcome. Now, that all sounds good, but it's also just worth taking looking at the alternative way, which is, well, what if I came at this auction and I say, well, I've just plugged away, there's a real, clear target for me, I just want this package, I've been plugging away at it, I don't want to pursue alternatives, it's that, it's that or nothing for me, okay. Well, that's fine as well. It's possible to increase the bid that you make for your final primary package in the supplementary bids round. And a consequence of the way the rules work, and I'll explain this in a minute, but if you increase it enough, you essentially have a formal, essentially a mathematical guarantee that that bid will win. So it's possible to lock in, the outcome at the end of the final clock rounds, if that's what you want to do. I mean, that's a strategic question. It may just be that you're not prepared to spend that much money, okay, and actually you prefer to, say, put some alternative backup options in instead. But that's, that's a business strategy question, not an auction strategy one. Okay, so how do we actually go about bidding in the supplementary bids round? Well, we have to submit a list of package bids, okay, and that can include packages which you haven't bid for in the primary bid rounds. You can increase bids that you've made for packages in the primary bid rounds, and all of this is managed through the EAS. So the EAS allows you to keep essentially a running list of packages that you might want to bid on, which you can assemble before you even get to the primary bids round. And I'll show you the software in a minute. So you could potentially just load in packages that are potential targets into the system. And then you will see, as the auction progresses and as you make decisions, what limits there are on the bids that you will then eventually be able to enter for those packages when it gets to the supplementary bids round. And the initial bid and the primary bids are already on that list, and you can then add more to that. The bid amounts that you make in supplementary bids round are discretionary, subject to certain constraints, and those are these caps, the relative cap and the final price cap. And the ES will tell you what constraints are applicable. And so what would happen is, well, you'll see this in a minute, you'll go to change a package and it'll say, computer says no, because you're constrained relative to some other bid that you're making. So if you go away and increase that, maybe you can then do this. So all of those constraints are explained and mapped out within the EAS. So what I want to do is just take a moment, just try and explain the sort of constraints that there are. This looks a bit complicated, but let's just take it in. This is kind of quite a good way of visualizing. Let's just take it slowly. Right, so what we can do is we can think about packages at different eligibility. Okay, so in the middle is the 0 package, which has no eligibility. Okay, the first onion layer is all the packages I set, let's say up to eligibility 50, say. Then we can think about all eligibility, all packages up to, say, eligibility 100, say 200, say 300, okay? But I can organize them into kind of concentric circles, these packages at different eligibility levels. And you remember we said at the beginning that it's reductions in eligibility that are important in terms of creating constraints. So there will be certain packages which I've chosen in eligibility reducing rounds, which are these red dots. So let's say I started off here with a big package. And then in some round I reduced down here. I made a reduction in eligibility. I made a reduction in eligibility down to this package. And then eventually there's a final primary package, which is what I was bidding for when the auction finished. So these red packages are all packages that are significant, okay, in terms of creating constraints on you. They're all ones where we're going to ask you to be consistent with the choices that you made in the round when you bid for them, either because it's an eligibility reducing round or because it's the final round, okay, of the primary rounds. So let's start with the yellow arrows for a minute. These are the relative caps, okay. So there are actually relative caps between these things as well. So if I, say, made a supplementary bid for this package here, that will be capped relative to, sorry, let's start from the outside. So this one here, okay, I made a reduction in eligibility down to here, so that will cap this package relative to this package, okay? This package, I was bid for this in that round, I did some other stuff, and then I made another reduction of eligibility. So this, whatever I bid for this, there will be a cap which says this plus something caps this package, okay? So there's essentially a chain of constraints created through these reductions in eligibility. Now, the final primary package is here, and there are also constraints on stuff to do with the final price cap, which I've shown in green. I haven't shown all of them because obviously it gets a bit impossible to see what's going on, but essentially any package, including all these red ones, will all be capped relative to this final primary package by the final price cap. So let's suppose now we come to make a supplementary bid of some sort, and we decided we wanted to bid on package A over here. What would be the constraints? Well, there would be a constraint relative to the final primary package, and there would also be a constraint relative to this package, which is one which I chose in the last round when I was able to bid for package A. So at some point, I stopped being eligible to bid for package A because I bid for that package instead. Okay, so there will be a relative cap across from that package. So, okay. So you can see, basically, I can increase this final primary package if I want. Then, providing I increase that, I can increase that black one. So I can make them, you know, €1 billion if I wanted, providing I make the final primary package high enough. These are all relative caps. Okay, but they are, this bid is limited by that bid is limited by that bid, and this bid is limited directly by that bid. Okay. Let's take another example at a large package and a higher eligibility level. So let's go over to package C. Well, in this case, in terms of the sort of onion layer of eligibility, the last time I had eligibility bid for package C, I actually bid for this package over here. That's what I bid for in that round when I lost eligibility to bid for C. So I'll be relatively capped to that package there. Okay, but that one is then capped by that one, that one's then capped by that one. So it always all feeds back through these links to the final primary package. And there's also a direct link from the final primary package through this green final price cap to that package. So each of these big packages here, they've both got two constraints on them. Which one is lower depends on how the prices have evolved over time. So you can't assume that one of these constraints is always irrelevant. Either could be relevant depending, it just depends. But one is around, the yellow ones, the relative caps are to do with the consistency against these eligibility reducing round choices. And the green one is about consistency with whatever you were bidding on when the final round stopped. Now, let's suppose we look at last at a smaller package, package B. So that might be smaller than your final primary package. Well, there's no relative caps on that, but it still has a final price cap. Okay? And that's the constraint there. So that's the general structure. Now, what I've shown you here is a situation where you finished with a regular primary bid. This is not a case where you have finished the primary rounds on a relaxed primary bid, which is a bit more complicated. I'm not proposing to show you that. There's some discussion of that in the IM. But this is the sort of more typical situation. The rules apply exactly the same in that more complicated case. I'm just not going to go through that with you now. So what are the consequences of this? Well, the consequences of the final price cap, let's go through this. First thing it does is it creates an incentive to bid for your most preferred package if you think there's a risk of the auction finishing, because you will be held to consistency of your choices against whatever you were bidding for when the primary round stopped. Because what it does is limit the differentials that you can bid for other packages. So you need to be careful about this, right, to make sure you're not on a package that you don't prefer. What it also does is it limits what rivals can bid for their supplementary bids and their ability to shift away from their final primary packages. So your rivals, if they suddenly decided they want to add loads of lots to their final primary package through a supplementary bid, they will be capped by the final price cap. So you know that there's always a limit on the amount that anybody else can express in terms of a bid that's trying to take away the lots that you have at the end of the primary rounds. Now, the consequence of this, and this is a sort of mathematical consequence, is that there's a possibility of guaranteeing winning your final primary package if you make a bid at a high enough level. Okay, this is just a mathematical structure of the rules. And that's what people usually call a knockout bid. So let's just take the following simple rule. Let's suppose that you increased your bid for the final primary package by the value of any unallocated lots at the end of the primary bid rounds, and just stick €100 on, which is the smallest increment you're allowed, just to make sure there's no ties anywhere. And then don't increase the price of anything else, the bid for anything else above the prices that apply in the final primary round. Now, it's a bit more complicated to finish with a relaxed primary bid. Look in the IM if you want that. But the consequence of that is that you will have a guarantee at a bid level, at that bid level, that you will receive your final primary package. Okay, that's a high enough bid to essentially always be bidding at least as much as anybody else can express through their bids to take those lots away from you. Now, there is a caveat. So when I say guarantee, of course, it's a guarantee with a get-out clause. The only way that that statement is not true, that you will win that package, would be if something has happened with, say, a deposit call and somebody's got thrown out, and there are more unallocated lots than you had bargained for. But, you know, there is a remote risk that that could happen. But that is obviously a remote risk, but you're always at risk of that. So when I use the word guarantee, please take it with that caveat. So some pointers for making those bids. Well, you hopefully want to be bidding for your preferred package at the end of the primary bid round, otherwise you might find yourself a bit snookered in terms of what you can then enter in supplementary bids. You can lock in a package that you're on at the end of the primary rounds with this knockout bid, which you might want to do providing that bid is below valuation. Obviously, you wouldn't want to bid above valuation to try and secure the package, because there would be prices that you might end up then paying when you think, God, I shouldn't have won that. So that wouldn't be a sensible strategy to try and lock in that package if it involved bidding more than your valuation. But you might be able to actually secure the package with a guarantee at less than your valuation. That's possible in some cases. But if you were not guaranteeing that, you probably want to consider making some backup bids for other possible options that you might win instead of your final primary package. And then if you were to do that, then you want to bid in a way such that the differentials in the bid amounts across these different alternatives reflected the relative values of those to you. Right, so I'm going to just briefly finish by showing you what that looks like if we go into the EAS. Right, now, the EAS really does help a lot in terms of managing all these supplementary bids. So it automatically includes all the primary bids in the initial bid in a list. You can add to a list of packages you're interested in. You can edit that. There's upload and download functionality, so you can use an Excel or something to basically prepare lists of targets and so on, and then upload that into the system. It shows you all the constraints, and it will update those as the auction progresses. And you can basically have the thing already prepared even before you start the supplementary bids round as this kind of starting point for entering your decisions. So in terms of editing, here we actually have a supplementary bids round in progress, entering decision. Okay, and this is telling us that there's 6 packages in the current package list, so you can have up to 1,000. So if you're wanting to use all of 1,000, you might want to be using Excel or some tool of your own to manage that, and then using the upload and download functionality. But you can do this all manually if you want. So these are the packages. Each package has an ID, so you can find it. And a package is obviously defined by how many lots there are in each of these categories as an associated eligibility level. It has reserve price, each package. These are the current highest bids, which are on here. These are the relative caps, which apply to those packages. So the yellow one is our final primary package, and that's not capped, because that can go to anything you like. So if I increase my bid for my final primary package, so that's currently at 1 million, okay, then it would have the effect of increasing the relative caps over here, because they are relative. Okay, if I want to change something, I can just click and modify, and I can delete. We can pull out the data in various formats. I can also upload data if I wanted, which is in a sort of fairly easy format where you just basically have to list these lot numbers across the rows. I can choose a file, upload that instead of using the online editing facility. Okay. Right, now I'm conscious of time, so I think I'm going to just make a very few comments about relaxed primary bids. These are bids where you may be able to bid for a package that exceeds your current eligibility. And the idea is that it provides an opportunity for bidders to bid for a package that they may actually prefer at the lot prices, the round price that has been set, but where your eligibility forbids you from doing it. So remember when we talked about reveal preference, if something becomes relatively cheaper, I might want to switch to it. So there could be a scenario in which there's a package which exceeds your current eligibility that has become relatively cheaper over the course of the auction because the thing that I'm going for has become expensive, which makes it attractive to shift to something else. Now, you are allowed to do that through this relaxed bid mechanism. So it's an additional form of flexibility. And there's a very easy way of interpreting it, which is essentially it's nothing but a rule that allows you to essentially make a valid supplementary bid in the course of a primary bid round, rather than having to wait until you hit the supplementary bids round. That's one way of interpreting this. Now, it's a little complicated, I admit, but it's flexibility. There's no obligation to use flexibility. It's there to provide the ability to bid on more options and to move around more fluidly between different alternatives. You don't have to use it if you don't want it. So you can only do this when the round price has evolved in such a way to make such a bid compatible with what you've already bid through revealed preference. Okay, so essentially what it means is that it has to be possible within the relevant caps, the relative caps that have been created by your previous eligibility reductions. If you want a very simple summary, essentially it's a package that you switched away from previously has to have become relatively cheaper compared to what you're bidding for now. If that's happened, then you will be allowed to go back and bid on a bigger package than your eligibility allows. Okay, so sometimes, I mean, you saw this kind of complicated structure. I'm not going to go through the words on this slide. You can look at that later. I can give you a very simple explanation of this. You saw from my onion diagram, sometimes we get these chains of relative caps happening up to these larger packages. Well, sometimes it could be that I want to make a bid for a larger package as a relaxed bid, but certain of the constraining packages along that chain are currently at too low a level. Now, what the rules say is basically providing those bids that are determining these caps can be increased without busting the current round prices, I will be allowed to make a relaxed bid, but I will be obliged to make an adjustment of those bids upward to the relevant level. Now, it sounds a bit complicated, but it's actually all dealt with by the EAS. Basically, the list of packages you have in the system, it will flag if at any point a relaxed bid is possible for those packages, and then it will say, if you make that bid, you'll have to put these chain bids in as well, which involves revising up a previous bid that you have made for a larger package to some degree. Okay, it might not have to go all the way up to the current round prices, but it will have to go up potentially a bit. Okay, and that's a chain bid. So the mechanics of this is it's all dealt with through the EAS that identifies when you can do it. It will tell you if you need a chain bid. It will tell you exactly what they need to be at. There's no penalty if you don't use these relaxed bids and the bids continue. But if you then stop, you'll find that there will be constraints on supplementary bids because of the, I explained to you the final price cap and that you get constrained by what you're on at the end of the primary rounds. So if the auction's getting close to finishing its final knockings, okay, it might be sensible to try and always pursue the thing that you really want. Okay, and the relaxed primary bid rules may provide a mechanism for you to do that, even if you've lost eligibility. Okay. And here's an example of actually making this. So here it tells us that a primary bid has been selected, a relaxed primary bid has been selected, and down here you can see that this is a summary of the bids for constraining packages and chain bids. So this actually required, in this case, a chain bid. Okay, so this is the package that we've selected. Okay, and various numbers of lots in various categories. Down here, there is actually another package which is setting a relative cap for the package I've chosen here. And I bid for that at some point ages ago when prices were relatively low. And unfortunately, that's meant the relative cap that would then be set for what I'm now choosing is set too low. But providing this package, constraining package here, the price is bumped up a bit, okay, and it won't be beyond the current round prices. That will basically relax the cap on this package to the point that I am allowed to bid for it at the current round prices. So what would happen is that if I press submit with this thing, then basically a bid will go in at round prices for this package, and then there will be an increase in this package which I previously bid for in eligibility reducing round up to the point that's required to make the first package consistent choice, and the amount that will go in that chain bid will be some amount no more than the current round prices. And that's all automated. It tells you exactly what will go in. So just to summarize, just my very last point, you'll see I've talked a lot about the importance of understanding the business case, because the CCA basically allows you to keep alternatives in play, switch around, and then use the auction mechanism by basically selecting out of the alternatives you've presented to it, hopefully something that out of those alternatives is best value to you. But if you're going to do that, then you have to have target packages and the relative business cases for those different target packages in mind. If you have that, then that then allows you to basically look at bidding for preferred packages against that set of valuations. And if you actually had a set of valuations and just bid to it and you didn't change the valuations, you would never be snookered by the activity rules, because the activity rules are designed to allow you to bid to a set of valuations. So really it's all about the business case. So this isn't an auction where you sort of turn up and say, right, we're going to go for this come hell or high water. That's not a good way of approaching it. What you want to do is think beforehand, well, these are good outcomes for us at certain prices, okay, and then go to the auction with outcomes and what you're prepared to pay for those outcomes in mind to bid to that sheet, essentially. And then you can use the flexibility that's in the auction mechanism to select one of those outcomes. And also, as I explained before, you also have essentially a property of the auction process is that you won't be paying more for that outcome then you need to secure it. So if you'd actually bid less, but still won, okay, then it's as if you're bidding less but have still won. Okay, it's basically the price is what you need to win essentially. So there's no point in trying to second guess the amount of competition that there is, because that's already baked into the pricing rules. Right, now I appreciate that is a lot of material, and there's probably quite a few questions on that, I would have thought. I'll try my best.
Right, questions from the floor.
Hi, Karim Ben Abdallah, 3 Ireland. Has that mechanism been used already in Europe for that type of band?
Yes, the CCA has been quite widely used now. I mean, this is very similar to what was used for the MBSA process, though there's quite a lot of simplifications, because there's a lot of the complications that were present for MBSA are not there. I mean, it's being used in many countries, the UK, the Netherlands, for example.
Okay.
More widely in Canada as well. Yeah, in Australia as well.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Right, we have an online question.
So regarding the caveat on how default on the deposit might impact on the effectiveness of the knockout bid. So the question is, will bidders know if there has been a default on the deposit that results in a different number of unallocated lots?
Well, it's a sequencing issue. The answer is not necessarily. So think about the order things happen. You put your supplementary bids in. ComReg then has an option to make a deposit call. Okay. Then let's suppose somebody defaulted. Their bids could be excluded, which would essentially mean that there are more allocated lots in play, but you've already made your supplementary bids at that point.
Okay, another question from the floor. It appears not. So Dan, you're going to continue with the...
Yes, I think we maybe have a very quick comfort break,
Yes.
and then I'll do a very quick run through. It won't be as long or as complicated on the assignment round. That shouldn't take too long.
I'm just going to take 5 minutes to stretch and then it's if necessary. We'll start with
Okay, if you could take your seats again, please. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to have a quick run through now the assignment round, and in particular a bit about how assignment options are generated, because obviously it's important for people to understand when they're bidding in the main stage, if I win a certain number of B lots, I mean, what can I then realistically expect to get in terms of actual frequencies? Because the B lots are obviously generic, as Samuel explained at the very beginning. These are generic lots that you're bidding for in the main stage, which don't have frequencies tagged to them. So in terms of valuing them and so on, you obviously want to know what that practically means in terms of what I will actually secure in terms of frequencies on my license at the end. So I want to run through that process. Maybe one moment. Right. So I think John's explained the bidder alliance to you, the concept of bidder alliance. And really, the reason that's there is because the auction rules recognise the fact that there could be winners of B lots who have common interests in terms of the frequencies they receive. So that's why those rules are there. And you are permitted to form alliances in the assignment stage. I mean, this is a slightly, probably quite innovative to include this freedom for bidders within the rules. We think that there's benefit to doing that. What you can't do is use alliances to bypass the spectrum cap. Okay, so you can't form an alliance that exceeds the spectrum cap in any region, because otherwise that would be obviously unfair. And I just point out again, this has been mentioned before, there are very specific rules around communication prior to the assignment stage. Okay, so this is a concession which only applies from the assignment stage forward. Now, assignment options. There are a number of guarantees which you can rely on in terms of what you will be awarded in terms of frequencies. Now, the first one is that you will always get the B block frequencies in any given region in a single frequency block. It will not be fragmented. So all those 5 megahertz lots that you're bidding for will all be next to each other, okay, within each region. A bidder who wins the same number of B lots in every region has a further guarantee, which is they will receive assignment options that they can bid on, which involve receiving the same frequencies in each region. Okay. And that is a consequence of the algorithm which is used for generating the assignment options, which I'll explain to you in a moment. Otherwise, for anybody else who doesn't win the same number of B lots in every region, they will be given a number of options as regards frequency location. And those options will, however, minimize the amount of misalignment in frequencies across regions. Okay. So that will mean not absolutely every possibility in terms of who we can put where will be available in terms of the assignment options. Some will be pruned off because they're just very untidy and involve people being split across different frequencies and so on. And you'll see some examples in a minute, and it means you should get really a reasonable degree of alignment in the frequencies you receive across different regions. Now, Annex 9 of the IM is what you need to look at on this issue, which explains in some detail how this all works. But I'll just start with very informally explaining for a minute. The way this is set up is essentially a constructed process for creating options for where bidders can go, essentially constructing frequency plans for the band. Okay, it is not set up as a sort of filtering exercise. It's not that we think about all the ways of packing people in and then filter that, because that's frankly not possible, because there's an astronomical number of ways of putting people in, given the fact that this is a regional auction. This is a constructive method that creates relatively neat outcomes where people have a degree of flexibility about where they go in the band. The constructive process has 2 steps to it. The first one is essentially splitting up the band across bidders to avoid what you might call untidy ends. And I'll explain untidy ends in a minute. And this sort of splitting process is a kind of recursive approach. So we take the band and we break it up, trying to avoid untidy ends. And then we take the pieces and we break them up, trying to avoid untidy ends. And any pieces that are still left, we break them up, and so on and so forth. So it's a recursive splitting process that tries to implement a certain formal notion of tidy ends to the chunks of spectrum. Then what we do, having done that, is to take any unsold lots that there are, we will look at moving those around within the band plan to try and tidy things up and improve frequency alignment for winners across regions to the extent that that's possible. So it's a two-step process. Firstly, trying to create tidy options and then to basically polish them up using unsold lots. So let me just define what I mean by untidy ends. So within the IM, this is defined formally as this notion of regional bandwidth variation is the terminology used. And that's defined to be the greatest number of B lots that you win in any region, less the smallest number of B lots that you win in any region. So let's take a very simple example with two regions. And let's suppose that bidder 1 has got 6 lots in one region and 2 lots in the other region. Well, their regional bandwidth variation, RBV, is 4, 6 minus 2. Okay, so let's look at the diagram. Let's suppose they're the blue guy. All we're saying is they've got a bit that sticks out in the region 1, and it sticks out by 4 lots. Okay, so that's the amount of untidiness there is across the regions. Now, let's have a look at bidder 2, and let's suppose they're the other way around. So they have 2 lots in the first region and 6 lots in the other region. Well, they also have an untidiness, an RBV of 4. But you can see, anybody who's played Tetris will really, I think, really appreciate this whole process. If you stick those two guys together, their untidy ends mesh nicely, and taken together, there's no untidiness. They have an RBV of 0. So they've got perfect alignment in frequency, across frequencies, across both bands, to get taken together. So you can see the idea already here. If we have people whose ends, as it were, mesh together, we want to keep them together because that means we have tidy ends that then allow us to allocate the other spectrum in a reasonable way. If we have people who we don't do that with, we're going to end up with these very untidy pieces of spectrum that are going to be difficult to accommodate people in a way that allows frequency alignment across the regions. So it's all about putting people next to each other, like these two guys here, who essentially complement each other with regards to these boundaries that are created. So just imagine that now with the 9 regions. I mean, it's all a bit more complicated. The principle is exactly the same. That's basically it. Right, but anyway, let's go through it step by step. The process is essentially to create essentially what you might call a tree, or a tree of bidders by this recursive splitting process. So what we do formally is to split all the bidders into smaller groups. The mathematical term would be a partition of the bidders, so that the regional bandwidth variation of all the groups is as small as possible. Then, if any of those groups are not down to single bidders, we take those groups, we then split them in a way to minimize regional bandwidth variation and so on. So the idea of the splitting is that when we take all bidders and we split them, okay, but we keep together those guys who have mesh well. So what we don't do is we don't take 2 groups and put one of the guys that mesh in one group and the other guy in the other group. We keep the people who mesh well together, okay, and that means that we get nice tidy band plans where people generally get similar frequencies across different regions. Okay, so let's just look at an example because it's very easy to see an example visually. So I'm going to just take example 5 from Annex 9 of the information memorandum, and this had 3 bidders and 4 regions. So we've got green, blue, and red bidders, and there's 1 unassigned lot in region 3. So bidder 1 is sort of a little bit untidy, RBV of 1. Bidder 2 has got an RBV of, this has got an RBV of 4, because this one sticks out 4 relative to the smallest. And bidder 3 is only in 3 of the 4 regions and has got an RBV of 2. So the first thing we do is we break up those bidders. Now, if I call them bidder 1, bidder 2, and unassigned, these are all of the ways of breaking up the bidders. So I can break them into 1 bidder here, 3 bidders there. I can do that in various ways. I could break them into 2 and 2, and I can do that in 6 different ways. I can break them into 1, 1, and 2, which I can do in 4 6 ways, or I can break them all down into individual bidders. Okay, so those are all the ways of breaking down the bidders that are there. And what we do is we calculate the RBVs of all of those. Okay, so looking at the groups. So what I'm doing is essentially looking at how messy the boundary is between the groups. Okay, and actually these green cases all have an RBV of 2. So those are the ones that have the least untidy boundaries. And then the IM sets up a tie-breaking rule in the case that we have equal minimum RVBs, which is firstly to look at taking the greatest number of groups. Well, actually, all of these involve 2 groups, so that doesn't help. Then what I do is I take the smallest, largest group. So here the largest group's got 3 in it. The largest group's got 3. Here the largest group has got 2 in it. So this is the splitting that we choose. Okay? The tie-break rules are there because we basically want to try and make as much progress with splitting up bidders in each step as possible, okay, and to keep things as equal as we can. All right, so that's why those rules are like that. So this gives us a splitting of the band into 2 groups, which is tidy. I sound a little bit like one of my Welsh aunts going on about tidy things, but this is the tidy one. Okay. Now, what that does is it creates a tree. Okay. So I start with all bidders. Then I have a split which goes down to this 2 and 2. Then obviously I said it's recursive, so we then apply the splitting process again, but in this case that's trivial because I've only got pairs, and there's obviously only one way to split pairs, which is down to individuals. All right? So this is my splitting tree that keeps tidy boundaries. Okay? And that obviously depends on what the outcome of the main stage is, what that looks like, but we calculate the optimum splitting tree. And that splitting tree then generates all of the ways of sticking people into the band. So all the band plans come from basically taking an ordering on these branches. So let's take just one example. It's very intuitive. So we started with all bidders. So let's put the bottom group at the bottom, top group at the top. Okay, so we'll do it that way around. Obviously we could do it the other way around, which will give us this case, where we put 2 and 3 at the bottom and 1 in the unsigned stuff at the top. Okay, right, then we break those again. So 1 and the unsigned stuff, we could put 1 below the unsigned stuff, or we could do it the other way around. We could put the unsigned stuff below, and we could put 1 above it. So if I think about just flipping these branches around each way, I will generate, because there are 3 branches involved here, I will generate 8 cases. All right? And then if I draw in the bidders, you can see, so this is what it actually looks like in practice. Green guy who's 1 is down here, the unassigned goes here, the blue goes here, and red who's 3 goes here. Okay? Or this one I could put the unassigned at the bottom, or if I go down here, I try and put the blue and the red at the bottom and the green and the unassigned at the top. Okay, so I get these different cases, and these are all reasonable band plans. And you'll see that they're not bad at all, actually. Obviously, red is always going to have this sort of L-shaped thing, but we can't really do any better because that's just the number of lots that they've won. Blue has got reasonable alignment, certainly where they've got smaller amounts here, they're within the range of frequencies that they've been given their larger amount. The same is true for green. So actually, all of these people will have RBV of 0, actually. Sorry. Oh, sorry, no, ignore that part. That was incorrect. So I've got ahead of myself. Strike that last sentence. I'll explain in a minute what I'm going to say. So the main thing to notice, we've only got 8 cases here. Actually, if I take 4 bidders, thinking about unassigned as a bidder, there'd actually be 24 ways of sticking those in the band. Okay, so only 8 of those are tidy, and the other 16 are all rather messy. So if I drew out some of those, you'll see that they are messy and involved unnecessary shifting of the frequencies assigned across different regions, so that then they didn't line up for a bidder. Now, the other thing, just in terms of the kind of, commercial impact of this, it's also worth just being clear about the fact that there are a variety of options created. So if we look at, say, the red bidder, you see we've got here a case where they're at the top of the band. There's always going to be a mirror image around this. So here is the mirror image where they're at the bottom of the band. There are also cases where they're around the middle of the band. So this will generate a reasonable range of alternatives for each bidder. Now,
if we say look at the green bidder, then obviously here's there at the bottom, these cases that they're at the bottom, these cases that they're at the top. You don't see a case when they're in the middle, because if I were to try and put the green one in the middle, that would create unnecessary misalignment for everybody else. Okay, so you may have a situation where certain bidders, because of what they've won and what everybody else has won, can't easily fit into the middle, but they will typically be cases where they go at one end, and if you can go at one end, there will also be another option where you go at the other end. Okay. So just to put this in context, 3.6 gigahertz is somewhere in the middle here, okay? So, I mean, people can go away and think about this for themselves, but that will generally mean that you need to prepare for a case where you go at the top end of the band, somewhere above 3.6, and there'll be another case where you would have access to frequencies below 3.6, and you'll be able to bid for those various alternatives, okay? If you may find that you don't have an option where you're sort of around the middle of the band because you don't fit very well. That entirely depends on the precise outcome. Right, now I just want to explain the other step, which is using unassigned lots. And here we need another concept, which is frequency misalignment. And the idea here is to basically look at the number of blocks, frequency blocks, in which a bidder has a lot in at least one region, and then look at that relative to the maximum number of frequency lots they have in any region. So very simple summary. How spread are they across the frequency space? Okay, and then if we imagine squishing them down to the minimum amount of space that they take across frequencies, which is obviously the maximum number of blocks they've won in any particular region, okay, how much more are they than the minimum? So if you look at these three examples, here, this guy, we could obviously, if we could move those green ones across, we can get him down to 3 blocks. But he's actually spread across 5 blocks. So 5 blocks rather than 3 blocks, there's a misalignment of 2. Okay. If we can get him nicely lined up here, so he's not across any more blocks frequency-wise than he needs to be, the misalignment drops down to 0. And obviously there might be different ways of achieving that. I mean, once your footprint in the frequency space is no larger than it needs to be, we don't really have any opinions about anything else. But it basically means that the frequency allocation you have in the region where you've won most lots is covering the blocks that you've won in regions where you've won fewer lots. Okay, so this is a sensible notion of frequency misalignment. So let's take a very simple example. This is a different example to the previous one I gave you, just to be clear. I'll come back to that previous example in a moment. But let's suppose we had something set up like this. So green is here with one bidder. We've got blue here. They don't look too bad. They've got 4 blocks here, and they have 2 here sort of fit within. Red, well, you know, they've got 1, 3, 3, 3, but this top 3 is displaced by 1. So they're essentially going across 4 frequency blocks when they could have gone across 3 frequency blocks. Yellow, well, they've got this L-shaped thing. That's kind of awkward, but there's nothing we can do about that. This is unassigned. Now, if we take those 3 unassigned blocks and use them as a buffer between blue and red, we can basically displace red across so that we've got them down to an overall footprint of 3. Okay? So in terms of the frequency misalignment metric I gave you before, we've gone from a situation where it was 0, 0 and misalignment of 1 for red down to 0, 0, 0. Okay? And what the auction rules say is we'll move unallocated lots to reduce misalignment, but only to the extent that reduces misalignment. So we won't go moving unallocated blocks unnecessarily, because obviously it's best for, you know, future availability of this spectrum that the unassigned blocks are kept together. So we don't want to fragment them unnecessarily, but we will, where there is a benefit in terms of the frequency misalignment metric, move them across to pad between bidders to improve frequency alignment. Okay. So overall, the rules give you pretty, I think, you know, it's not, if you win a different number of lots in different regions, you don't have a guarantee about exactly what you'll end up with, but the rules really try to do a reasonable amount to ensure that you have a good prospect of getting well-aligned frequencies across regions. Right, now, so those are the options. So we generate options by creating all these frequency plans using this method,
And then for each bidder, the assignment options are the various positions where they might be within the band. Okay, so if I go back to my previous example with these 8 cases, in fact, in this example, all of these have got a 0 misalignment. I don't need to move any unassigned spectrum around. Okay, here, that can't improve anything. They're all as good as they can be. So from the red perspective, this involves 4 options. Top, there's lower middle, bottom, upper middle. Okay, so red will be presented with those 4 frequency plans. Okay. Now, you don't get to see anybody else's plans because obviously they could vary. Okay, so if red gets one of those options, there are various band plans that are then compatible with red getting a particular position. So you just get presented with your possible positions, a list of your possible positions, which you then get to bid on. So a bid for an assignment option needs to reflect relative preference across different frequency outcomes. So for red, okay, it had a top, a bottom, these 2 middle options. And all that matters here are essentially the differences between the bids that you make for different assignment options, okay? Because you'll always get one of them, yep? You will win one of those options because you're guaranteed to get the spectrum that you won in the main stage, right? So it's only about which of those options you win. So that means it's all that matters the relativities between your bids. So if you feel that way inclined, there's nothing to stop you adding €100 million to all your assignment option bids for the different options. That will make no difference to what you win or what you pay, but might well cause quite a significant deposit request, I think, if you were to do that. So the obvious consequence is you may as well just leave your least favourite option at 0 and then treat that as the 0 level, and then anything that's better than that, you put a positive bid in for it to represent that being preferred to the least preferred option. Okay. If you just don't care about which frequencies you want, then you just leave all your bids at 0. You're not required to make any bid. You don't even need to log in and participate in the assignment round. If you do that, all your bids will just be defaulted at 0. You'll be treated as if you have no preference, and you'll just get whatever you're given. Basically, other people's preferences will be taken into account, and you'll get wherever you fit in. Okay, so there's no compulsion to use this. There will be additional prices which are determined by opportunity cost in a similar manner to in the main stage. And that obviously depends on how other people value the frequency option that you win, so how much competition there is for that frequency option. Again, as before, it won't ever exceed the amount of your winning bid, and for very similar reasons, that means you don't really have any particular benefit in reducing the amount below what it's worth to you. You're not going to save anything on what you pay, because it's the other guy's bids that determine what you pay. Right, so the logic is very similar. Okay, are there any questions about that? Anything online? Okay, just give it another moment. Right, in that case, I shall hand back to Samuel, who's going to discuss next steps.
Okay, I had a question at one of the tea breaks just about what we're going to do with unassigned spectrum. So I said I'd just mention that. And the answer is in the decision note that was published earlier this year, and we will do nothing with it for at least 2 years, after which, on the circumstances and what's available, we will then decide what step to take next. So at the end of this award process, any of those unassigned lots, we do nothing for 2 years on those. And that is to stop people not bidding truthfully in the auction with an attempt to get some spare spectrum at the end of it. Someone also asked about the auction software, and in the mock auctions, we will be setting it up, and any qualified bidders are able to bid in a mock auction against a team of ComReggers and Dotty Connors, and we'll push you hard on things like trying to knock you out of your preferred target area, let you do relaxed primary bidding, try and give you all the options to test the software so you'll get familiar with it. I'm just looking for a nod. Do we go one step further? And
yes, but please don't treat this as a commitment, but I think we're happy to share what our current plans are for the sort of bidder training. So as Samuel says, I think the idea would be to have mock auctions, but they would be on a one-to-one basis. So the idea is then that if you have trouble or difficulty, we're on the other end of the phone and we will then be there to help and talk through things with you. So rather than having many different participants and it being difficult to provide that level of support. So it would be a one-to-one basis. I don't think we have any particular plans for how many there would be at the moment, and I think that's very much on demand, depending on what people need. I mean, I think we see people understanding the process being more important than sort of breakneck speed, should we say. The other thing that we're currently planning on doing is potentially making some sort of playground kind of environments available, which in a sense would be to allow you access to the auction software to conduct auctions yourself, which you can schedule and run yourself to mess around with on your own time, rather than us having to run it. And that would be made available. It'd be up to you whether you want to use that or not. I think we would like people to try and do at least some of that, if only just to check to make sure that all their IT worked correctly before getting into the auctions that then require our time to run. That would be a very helpful thing. The other thing that we're proposing to do is to make available the software that implements the various algorithms for limit determination, pricing, assignment option generation, and so on. But that would be through an online system which would allow you to load data in, evaluate the results according to the algorithm set out in the IN, and get the answers back. What we're concerned is that there should be an equal playing field and everybody has equal access to prepare. And there shouldn't be advantages to people who are able to build software to do this stuff. So we want to basically make it available on a neutral basis to more qualified bidders. I should also say that those things are things which we were thinking of making available to qualified bidders after qualified bidders have been determined, to be absolutely clear, and not general public access.
Correct. Yep. But before that, we're going to make this webinar recording, the presentation materials, and any substantive clarifications or maybe a few answers to some of the questions that came out in written form. We'll make that available on our website in due course. Be aware the process for submitting questions on the award process is set out in section 3.3.1. Please follow that, as is the application procedure in section 3.3.6. Your homework is, by the 28th of September, to get those questions in. Our obligation is the final date to submit, to answer those questions is the 12th of October. Your homework then to get your applications in by the 26th of October. Also the same to get the deposits in. And as a final note, the restriction on auction-related communication comes into effect as soon as you submit your first application to ComReg. Thank you very much for being in attendance, for asking questions. Thank you to the people online who asked questions. It was a good session, good engagement, and well, this is rolling, and by the end of the year we should see some results from this. Thank you, everyone.